mistaking volume for truth, as if shouting ever deepened meaning. The loudest voice in the room often wins, not through reason, but through rhythm, repetition, and thunder, as if noise itself could stitch a truth into the fabric of a mind merely by being loud enough, long enough, insistent enough. Volume becomes a performance, not a proof. The decibel of a statement can eclipse the quality of its content, and in that moment, conviction begins to masquerade as clarity. Not because it makes more sense, but because it takes up more space. In ancient halls and crowded cities, history has watched ideas rise not on the strength of their substance, but on the storm of their delivery. Voices raised to fever pitch, veins drawn tight under skin, eyes wide and urgent, as though passion were a passport to correctness. But even an engine roaring on empty can still drown out the sound of a steady stream. Words, when shouted, do not grow stronger. They grow sharper, harsher, more jagged at the edges. They may cut through the air, but not necessarily into the soul. The loudest declarations often carry within them a tremor of insecurity, a desperate need to be heard, not because the truth is evident, but because it fears being ignored. Loudness becomes armor, a trembling disguise over doubt. And yet, in many rooms, the one who speaks softly is overlooked. The calm tone mistaken for weakness, the measured voice misread as uncertainty. The whisper is dismissed, even when it carries the weight of ancient wisdom. The loud one leads, and the quiet one watches. But meaning has never been measured in volume. Meaning exists in the depth of understanding, not in the height of pitch. Think of a forest after rain. Nothing screams there. Not the trees, not the moss, not the water sliding from leaf to earth. And yet everything speaks. The silence of the woods is not absence, it is presence. A kind of speaking that doesn't need to force itself forward. It simply is, and in that being, says more than any raised voice could. To scream an idea is to try and nail it to the sky. But truths are more like seeds. They must be buried softly, given darkness and time. Only then do they unfold into something real, something rooted. The louder the planting, the less chance it grows. Noise compacts the soil. And yet the world keeps shouting. Marketing shouts, politics shouts. Even love, at times, shouts. "Look at me," says the billboard, not because it is beautiful, but because it is bright. "Believe me," says the pundit, not because he is wise, but because he never stops talking. "Stay with me," says the insecure heart, not because it offers peace, but because it fears silence. In the crowd of voices, truth is not the one that wins, it is the one that waits. Volume can be violence. It storms into a room, demanding space, leaving others folded like origami just to make room. The still thinker, the hesitant voice, the question that comes like a feather instead of a hammer, these are pushed aside. But volume doesn't validate, it only amplifies, and what is amplified isn't always worth hearing. Children learn early that the one who shouts first often gets attention, not justice. That loudness can become a form of currency, traded for visibility. But visibility is not veracity. Something can be bright and still false. A flame burns with light, but consumes without wisdom. In the courtroom of the mind, every thought deserves equal hearing. But the shout is a gavel that falls too fast. It declares guilt or truth before evidence can breathe. And yet, the temptation remains. To raise a voice when fear stirs. To believe that louder means righter. But even thunder does not explain the storm, it only announces it. Consider the ocean's roar. Powerful, yes, but the wisdom of the sea lives not in its crashing waves, but in its quiet depths. Surface noise fades, but in the deep, things endure. The loudest part of the sea is also the most fleeting. The real weight lies below, where silence rules and pressure shapes. Words deserve more than lungs behind them. They deserve thought before them and meaning beneath them. Volume without vision is just wind. There is no truth in shouting that was not already present in silence. The loud voice may win the moment, but only the quiet truth survives the decades. Some shout because they know no other way. Others listen because they know no other truth. In the end, the world forgets the noise, but remembers the note that lingered after. The softest part of a song often holds the soul of it. So the next time a voice rises like a flare, ask not what it claims, but what it conceals. Ask what stands behind the volume. Is it certainty or the fear of being wrong? Is it love or the fear of being unheard? Even a lie can be loud. Even silence can be wise. The wind shouts, and the mountain remains unmoved. Reading silence as consent, forgetting how oceans stay quiet even in storm. Silence has always made people uneasy. It enters a room and leaves space where expectation used to live. It leaves questions hanging in the air like fog, thick and uncertain, but not without shape. And yet, so often, silence is taken as agreement, as if the absence of objection were the presence of approval, as if no words meant yes, as if quiet meant peace. But the ocean teaches something else. It holds storms inside without a sound. Whole tempests churn beneath its surface, invisible to those who only glance. The calm above does not mean calm within. In fact, the quietest waves often conceal the deepest unrest. And yet, the world reads silence like a signature. It assumes agreement, compliance, harmony, and it misses the truth. There are silences filled with thunder. Silences where every breath is a scream held back, where every still face masks a mind sprinting through possible words and choosing again and again none. Not out of agreement, not out of alignment, but because some truths are too complex to explain to someone who has already stopped listening. Silence is not the same as surrender. A bowed head does not always mean reverence. It might mean restraint. It might mean waiting for a moment that never comes, or deciding that no moment is worthy of what needs to be said. Silence can be protest dressed in shadow. It can be wisdom choosing its battlefield. It can be dignity or exhaustion or the silent grip of fear. But the world craves answers. Quick ones, loud ones. Words that fill in all the blanks so the mind doesn't have to wait. So when silence arrives, it gets interpreted, painted over, turned into something it never claimed to be. Agreement, approval, indifference, all projected onto a canvas that never asked to be filled. A judge might ask, "Do you object?" And silence becomes permission. A friend might say, "You didn't speak up, so you must have agreed." But the truth might have lived behind a closed mouth, folded like a letter never sent. There is a kind of silence born not of peace, but of calculation. The silence of someone weighing whether speaking would do more harm than good. The silence of someone who has been punished before for saying too much. And sometimes, silence is not a choice. It is a freeze. The mind unable to find words, the body unsure of safety, the spirit clinging to a kind of stillness it hopes will pass unnoticed. In these moments, silence is not a statement. It is a survival instinct. And to misread it is to miss the entire story unfolding behind the eyes. There are those who confuse stillness with softness, who take the absence of confrontation as the presence of comfort. But silence has teeth. It can bite through illusion. It can hold a room in suspense. It can be a mirror held up to noise, asking, gently but firmly, "Is there anything here worth answering?" Nature speaks in silence all the time. The tree does not scream as it grows. The stars do not declare themselves in sound. Mountains rise in stillness. And yet, their presence changes everything. Silence, too, can move worlds. It simply does so without the need to explain itself. In relationships, silence is often misread. One partner says nothing, and the other imagines it means everything. He's fine. She agrees. Nothing's wrong. But silence is not always contentment. It might be distance, or disappointment, or the quiet rehearsal of an exit. Not all silences are passive. Some are loaded. Some are strategic. Some are aching. Consent requires clarity. It requires choice. It requires the sacred act of saying yes when yes is meant. Anything less is assumption draped in the illusion of harmony. And assumption is a dangerous architect. It builds houses on hollow ground and is surprised when they collapse. Silence is a territory all its own. To walk through it with grace requires humility. It asks for listening, not to words, but to the spaces between them, to the weight in the eyes, to the tension in the hands, to the unsent messages that live just beneath the surface. Some silences beg to be broken. Others beg to be respected. The wisdom lies in knowing which is which. To push for words where silence is sacred is to rupture something fragile. But to assume silence means everything is fine is to leave wounds unseen. The ocean doesn't explain itself. It just is. But that doesn't mean it consents to what sails upon it. There's a silence after betrayal. It doesn't mean forgiveness. There's a silence during grief. It doesn't mean healing. There's a silence in trauma. It doesn't mean peace. And there's a silence in love, too, one that simply needs no words. Silence has many voices. To listen only to sound is to miss most of what's being said. There is a kind of stillness that speaks volumes, but only to those who don't rush to translate it. Some things are meant to be sat with, not solved. Some silences are answers in themselves, but only if the question is patient enough. And there is always the possibility that silence is the only honest response. That language would distort what silence holds intact. The ocean does not explain every wave, nor does it owe anyone an answer for its calm. Silence does not always require explanation. It deserves presence. Witness, a kind of attention that listens with more than ears. In the end, silence is not a blank page. It is a full one written in invisible ink. It takes time, warmth, and often courage to read it properly. And even then, it might not say what is expected. It might say nothing at all. But nothing does not always mean nothing. Sometimes it means everything. And so the storm rages under the surface, and the ocean remains quiet. Not because it agrees, not because it consents, but because that is its way. And not every silence waits to be interrupted. Some silences simply wait to be understood. Trusting the first spark of thought, though the mind still rubs sleep from its eyes. The beginning of a thought often feels like revelation. It arrives suddenly, a spark in the dark, a whisper that demands attention. It speaks quickly, sometimes even beautifully, and for that reason alone, it is believed. The mind grabs hold, not because the idea is true, but because it is first. And what is first tends to feel foundational. But the first thought is often the least mature, still swaddled in emotion or instinct or echo. It hasn't yet stretched its legs or found its balance. It is the morning groan of awareness, not the clear voice of reflection. The mind, like the body, needs time to wake. It stumbles when it's rushed. First thoughts, like dreams, can be vivid but misleading. They wear the clothes of certainty, but carry the breath of sleep. And still, they are trusted. Still, they are followed. As if the earliest flicker of an idea must point true north. As if speed equals insight. But truth is rarely impatient. It waits beyond the first impulse, beyond the knee-jerk, beyond the immediate answer. It waits in the quiet moments, after the noise of reaction has passed. First thoughts are often unedited. They are stained with fear, shaped by habit, softened or sharpened by yesterday's weather. They come from the shallows. It takes time to reach the deep. There's something comforting in trusting the first thing that comes to mind. It feels decisive. It feels bold. But that comfort can be costly. Decisions made on first thought alone can miss entire forests because one tree stood nearest. That first spark might light a path, or a fire. It doesn't always reveal which. The mind is a layered thing. What rises first is often just sediment stirred by sudden motion. To reach wisdom, the waters must settle. Clarity lives beneath the ripple. But modern life rewards immediacy, instant reactions, snap judgments, quick replies. First thoughts have become currency. But speed does not sanctify an idea. Only depth does. Imagine a sculptor trusting the first swing of the chisel without pausing to see the grain of the stone. Imagine a painter committing to the first stroke without seeing the whole canvas. The first thought is a color, not the painting, a note, not the symphony, a doorway, not the destination. Often, first thoughts are inherited, echoes from upbringing, culture, fear. They masquerade as intuition, but intuition that hasn't been tested can be indistinguishable from bias. There's a difference between knowing and reacting, between wisdom and reflex. And the space between the first thought and the second is where growth begins. That space is sacred. That pause, the one so often skipped, is where understanding waits. It's where the mind opens its eyes fully, shakes off the remnants of assumption, and begins to really see. In that space, thoughts are not taken for granted. They are turned over, held to the light, asked gently, "Are you true or are you just loud?" And even if the first thought is right, letting it prove itself adds weight. It is not weakened by scrutiny. It is strengthened. It becomes real, not just reflexive. Truth endures questioning. Illusion doesn't. The first spark of thought is tempting. It is bright. It is immediate. It is thrilling. But it is not always the sun. Sometimes it is just static, just the flicker of old wiring, a trick of memory or fear or habit. The mind, just like the eye, sees better once it adjusts. And adjustment takes time. It's easy to confuse the vivid for the valid, to feel the certainty of an idea and call it knowledge. But emotions can dress up a thought and send it running into the world long before it's ready. It's possible to be moved by an idea that isn't true, possible to act on it, to speak it, to wound with it, all before the deeper thoughts have had a chance to rise. And so the first spark flares, and with it, the invitation. Not to follow blindly, but to pause, to ask, to wait, to let the rest of the mind catch up, like eyes adjusting to dawn. The first light is not the full day. Let the sun rise. Taking repetition as proof, like believing an echo speaks for itself. There's a strange power in repetition. A phrase repeated often enough begins to feel like fact. A lie, said again and again, starts to wear the coat of truth. And so people believe not because the idea makes sense, but because it has been spoken into familiarity. The mind hears it, again and again, and mistakes recognition for wisdom. This is how slogans work, how dogma spreads, how misinformation roots itself like ivy in a forgotten corner of the mind. It doesn't need to make sense. It only needs to be heard often. Over time, it grows a rhythm. It starts to rhyme with everything else already believed. And slowly, the echo becomes an argument. But an echo is not a source. It is not new. It is not original. It adds nothing. It only returns. And what returns can often be empty, repeated for its comfort, its volume, or its popularity, not for its depth. Repetition is mistaken for reliability. Everyone is saying it, becomes a stand-in for, it must be true. But truth is not a democracy. Consensus can be wrong. Crowds have cheered for horrors. History is full of choruses that drowned out the quiet voice of reason. Ideas, when repeated, gain shape, not because they grow truer, but because they become harder to ignore. They take up residence. They echo so many times that the silence in between begins to sound like agreement. But repetition is not revelation. It is rhythm. It is memory's trick. It is the brain saving energy by accepting what has already been heard. A rumor told enough becomes reputation. A bias repeated enough becomes belief. A fear reinforced enough becomes law. Repetition doesn't just convince, it conditions. It seeps into the way perception works, until doubt seems strange and certainty seems natural. But not all certainty is clarity, and not all echoes are voices. Sometimes they are ghosts. Sometimes they are old noise bouncing off new walls. And yet, they are trusted, simply because they are familiar. It takes effort to question what has been heard too often. Familiar ideas offer safety. They don't require new bridges of thought. They don't ask for construction. But they rarely build anything either. They loop, they circle, they fill space without moving forward. There is a comfort in repetition, and that comfort can be a trap. The mind, like water, follows the path of least resistance. And so the most repeated thought becomes the most traveled road, but not the most thoughtful, not the most true. To mistake repetition for evidence is to mistake volume for vision. The same sentence, repeated, does not become wiser. It only becomes louder. And loudness, like repetition, is no proof of anything except persistence. Some of the most dangerous ideas in history were simple and repeated. That is why they stuck. That is how they spread. Not through brilliance, but through endless echoes. The challenge, then, is not just to hear what is said, but to ask where it began, to trace the echo back to the voice, to ask whether the original sound ever deserved repeating. Just because something has been said 1,000 times does not mean it should be said once more. Truth does not rely on echoes. It stands even in silence. It does not fear the absence of applause. It does not need reinforcement. It simply is. And so the echo calls, and the mind listens. But before believing, it can pause. Ask not just whether something is familiar, but whether it is real, whether it leads anywhere, whether the echo still carries a voice or only repeats the hollow notes of forgotten noise. Let the echo fade. Let the silence return. Let the mind speak something new. Confusing urgency with value, while even falling leaves hurry to nowhere. There is a rush that disguises itself as importance, a pressure in the chest, a pull in the spine, a whisper in the mind that says, now, do it now, say it now, choose it now. Urgency rises like heat, making everything shimmer with false weight. It tightens time. It narrows the world to a single tunnel and tells the heart that what is fast must also be vital. But not all speed is significance. Not all pressure is purpose. Even falling leaves move quickly as they descend toward the earth, but their hurry carries no meaning. Their descent changes nothing about the season. The tree remains. The forest breathes. The world continues. Speed alone is not direction. Movement alone is not mission. Still, urgency seduces. It wears the costume of momentum. It pretends to be clarity. It barks like an alarm. And that noise pulls the mind away from stillness, away from patience, away from the longer gaze that sees the full picture. Urgency cuts the frame smaller. It makes everything feel immediate, and therefore, important. Deadlines demand. Notifications flash. Questions are asked with eyes that expect answers not in minutes, but in seconds. The world spins faster than the soul can walk, and in the rush, depth is often traded for efficiency. But depth resists clocks. Wisdom ignores countdowns. To confuse urgency with value is to confuse volume with meaning, light with warmth, motion with meaning. Urgency thrives on the discomfort of pause. It punishes stillness. It mocks reflection. It says, if it mattered, it would happen now. But the most important things in life unfold slowly. Grief, love, growth, forgiveness. None of them obey urgency. None of them can be forced open. They flower when they are ready. And sometimes, when they are not ready, they must wait in silence, untouched by pressure. Urgency has its place, but that place is small. It is for fire alarms, for falling objects, for sharp turns on mountain roads. Not for decisions of the heart. Not for matters of truth. Not for the choice of who to become. Rushing through those doors may feel like progress, but often it leads only to a new room filled with regret. There is a slowness that does not mean laziness, a patience that does not mean indifference, a stillness that does not mean apathy. These states hold a kind of wisdom that urgency can't reach. They breathe. They listen. They sense what hurrying hides. Even nature knows this. Seeds do not rush to sprout. Rain does not fall in panic. The moon does not rise with urgency. And still, everything happens. Everything arrives. Everything returns. Urgency often comes with fear at its heels. The fear of missing out. The fear of being left behind. The fear of disappointing someone, somewhere. But fear is not a compass. It is a reaction. It is a spark, not a signal. And so the question becomes, what is really needed right now? Is it action, or is it breath? Is it reply, or is it understanding? Does the pressure come from within, or from a world that rewards quickness over quality? Sometimes urgency is just anxiety dressed in purpose's clothing. Sometimes it is just noise demanding to be treated like music. But music, true music, has rests between the notes. Urgency tries to erase those rests. A falling leaf spins quickly as it drops. But the tree does not cry out. The forest does not chase. The sky does not grieve the speed. All remain still, watching. They know. Speed is not always significance. A thing rushing does not mean it is rising. Let the hurry pass. Let the pressure speak, then fade. Then ask, what is truly needed now? And more often than not, the answer will be quiet, slow, simple. A path not paved in panic. Let the leaf fall. Let it find its ground. Not every urgency must be answered. Not every hurry deserves attention. The most valuable things take their time, and they are worth the wait. Trusting the crowd's direction, though history records their marches off cliffs. There is comfort in the crowd, a sense of safety in numbers, of not being alone, of walking a path already worn smooth by countless feet before. When everyone seems to be going the same way, it feels less like a choice and more like gravity. Resistance feels unnecessary. Questioning feels lonely. The crowd moves like a current, and the instinct is to float with it. But history remembers where those currents led. It remembers the cities built on cruelty because everyone agreed. It remembers wars cheered into being by stadiums full of chanting voices. It remembers scapegoats and silences, and how easy it was for many to believe they were right simply because they were not alone. The crowd gives the illusion of certainty. So many people can't be wrong, the mind whispers. But they can. They have. Over and over again. Truth is not tallied by head count. Right is not confirmed by applause. The crowd is often blind not because it cannot see, but because it has stopped looking. Movement replaces questioning. Consensus replaces curiosity. And in the crowd's rhythm, individual thought becomes background noise. There's a kind of hypnosis in the herd. It softens doubt. It rewards sameness. It penalizes pause. To stop walking is to feel strange. To ask, why this way, is to risk being left behind. And so the feet move faster than the mind, and the direction becomes habit. But cliffs don't care about confidence. The edge remains the edge no matter how many step toward it. There is no safety in shared error. 1,000 wrongs do not make a right, even when they march in sync. The danger lies not in walking together, but in walking without thought. In trusting the direction because others trust it. In outsourcing one's own sense of truth to the collective's momentum. There is wisdom in community, yes, but wisdom requires friction. Debate. Dissent. not just agreement. The crowd that never questions itself is a crowd walking blindfolded, no matter how straight the line. Look at the history books. Look at the verdicts later overturned, the norms later shamed, the movements later mourned. At the time, they all felt like progress. They felt like unity. They felt right. But they were wrong. And they were believed not because of evidence, but because of echoes. To walk alone is not to be lost. To pause while others move is not to fall behind. Sometimes it is to see the cliff they do not. Sometimes it is to hear the quiet voice that says, "This path is wide, but not wise." Crowds can be kind, and they can be cruel. They can heal, and they can harm. What matters is not how many walk the road, but why. What leads them? What questions they allow? What doubts they carry, not what slogans they chant. It is easy to mistake volume for vision, but vision often begins in solitude, in stepping aside, in asking, "Is this really the way?" Not because others believe it, but because the heart recognizes something deeper. Marches off cliffs never begin as tragedies. They begin as movements, full of hope and music and momentum. And then the edge arrives, and by then, it feels too late to stop. But it's never too late to pause, to turn, to question, to see with one's own eyes, not just follow the backs of others. Truth does not always walk the popular path, and the right direction is not always the one most traveled. Let the crowd pass if it must. Let it move with its songs and banners and momentum. Let the dust rise behind them. And then, look around. Look ahead. Look within. The cliff can be avoided. The path can be chosen, even if it means walking alone. Mistaking the familiar for the real, like seeing a ghost so often it becomes furniture. The mind does not always see what is there. It sees what is expected, what has been seen before, what fits into the outlines already drawn by years of repetition. And so the familiar begins to wear the mask of the real, not because it is true, but because it has stayed long enough to feel native. Familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort, over time, can feel like truth. That shape in the corner, that feeling in the hallway, that belief whispered again and again. If it lingers long enough, it stops being questioned. It becomes furniture. It blends into the space. It earns its place not by merit, but by presence. Even ghosts can become household objects if they never leave. Patterns are powerful. They train the mind to move without friction, to skip the question and jump to the conclusion. Familiarity makes things smooth. It shortens the distance between sense and certainty. But ease of thought is not evidence of truth. Just because something returns again and again doesn't mean it belongs. A lie, repeated often, doesn't become real, but it does become routine. And in that routine, suspicion grows dull. The unfamiliar is feared. The strange is pushed aside. The mind clings to what it knows, and what it knows is not always what is. There are beliefs passed down like heirlooms, carried not because they are cherished, but because they are familiar. Carried because they fit in the hand, in the house, in the sentence. Some ideas have been lived in so long they creak like old floorboards, but they are still mistaken for the ground itself. It is possible to live inside illusions built from habit. To mistake the outline of a life for the pulse of one. To think something is real just because it has been there as long as memory can reach. But even a shadow can stretch across a lifetime if the light never moves. The familiar can soothe. It can lull. It can protect. But it can also blind. It wraps around perception like a blanket and whispers, "This is all there is." It turns questions into echoes. It fills the silence with assumptions. It replaces observation with recognition, and in doing so, erases discovery. To see clearly, the familiar must be made strange again. The edges must be felt. The meaning must be re-examined. What is it really? And what has it become only through repetition? Even relationships can become this way. Roles accepted, never examined. Patterns played out like old theater. Arguments repeated, not because they're unresolved, but because they're expected. Over time, even resentment can become part of the wallpaper. Even silence can become a companion. Truth waits beyond the expected, beyond the known, beyond the comfort of "I've seen this before." Because seeing is not the same as seeing clearly. Recognition is not the same as understanding. And routine is not the same as reality. Like walking into a room and not noticing the ghost anymore. Like brushing past it on the way to the kitchen. Like sitting beside it at the table. Over time, even hauntings become hospitality. But to awaken, to really awaken, is to notice again. To feel the weight of what has been accepted too easily. To touch the edges. To wonder, is this still true? Was it ever? Or is it just what I've learned to live with? Familiarity makes the unreal seem harmless. But comfort is not always kindness. And some truths only arrive when the room is rearranged, when the ghost is noticed again for what it is. Out of place, still lingering, still unspoken. There is strength in stepping back, in seeing with new eyes what has been seen too long, in asking hard questions of soft memories, in pulling the ghost back into the light and asking gently, "Are you real? Or have I just grown used to you?" Even furniture can be moved. Even old rooms can be cleared. And even the most familiar truths, if tested, may reveal themselves as echoes long mistaken for home. Believing ease confirms truth, as though softness ever proved strength. Ease is mistaken for rightness, in the same way sweetness is mistaken for nourishment. It pleases, it calms, it comforts. But comfort and truth are not twins. Sometimes they do not even speak. Ease is pleasant. It's quiet. It slips into the heart without resistance. And for that reason alone, it's often believed. There is a temptation to think that if something is true, it will come naturally, that it will feel soft in the hands, smooth in the mind, warm in the chest. But truth does not always arrive kindly. It does not always fit easily into the sentences already formed. Sometimes it disrupts. Sometimes it disturbs. Sometimes it hurts. Ease is not proof. Ease is only the absence of effort. But much that is worthwhile asks for effort. Much that is true demands resistance. The mountain path is not easy, but it rises. The ocean's tide is not still, but it is steady. Truth does not promise comfort. It promises clarity. And clarity is not always gentle. The mind, however, seeks softness, seeks agreement, seeks things that feel smooth and good and known. It mistakes this comfort for confirmation. It assumes, if I feel good, it must be right. But many illusions feel good. Many distractions feel like home. Many lies arrive wrapped in softness. And still, they are lies. The most dangerous beliefs are not the ones that shout. They are the ones that soothe. That stroke the hair. That say, everything's fine, don't look too closely, don't ask too much. They lull the spirit to sleep. They wear the scent of truth, but never carry its weight. Hard truths often arrive like cold water. They sting. They disrupt the sleep. They demand movement. They ask the hands to get dirty. They ask the heart to stretch. And still, they are the ones that liberate. Because truth does not always come softly, but it always comes clean. There is also a belief that if a relationship is right, it will be easy. That if a choice is meant to be made, it will require no struggle. But anything deep asks for effort. Any real connection weathers storms. Ease is not a sign of truth. It is sometimes only the absence of depth. Growth rarely feels easy. Healing rarely arrives without ache. Transformation is not soft. It burns, breaks, rebuilds. And truth is often at the center of that fire, waiting not to be held like a pillow, but to be faced like a flame. Ease can be a beginning, but it is not a destination. It can offer rest, but not reason. It can suggest, but it cannot confirm. Because truth is earned in the tension, in the questioning, in the reaching beyond what feels good into what feels real. The mind wants softness, but the soul wants strength. And strength does not come wrapped in comfort. It comes wrapped in struggle, in confusion, in the willingness to press deeper. Not every difficult thing is true, but most truths have passed through difficulty. They've been tested, shaped, refined, like steel in fire, like character in trial, like love in time. Ease is not proof. It is only silence in the absence of resistance. And silence, though peaceful, does not always mean peace. Sometimes it means sleep. And sleep can be sweet, but it can also be escape. Truth is not afraid of friction. It is not undone by discomfort. It survives being questioned. It survives being wrestled with. And in the end, it asks not for comfort, but for courage. So let ease come. But let it be questioned. Let it be held up to the light. Let it be asked, is this true, or is this just pleasant? Because what pleases is not always what frees. And the softest path may not always lead to the strongest truth. Confusing boldness with skill, forgetting that masks also look confident. Boldness enters the room first. It walks with the chest high, the gaze fixed, the words already formed. It takes up space without apology. It declares, decides, demands. And because boldness feels like certainty, it is often mistaken for competence. The loud voice must know what it's saying. The firm hand must be skilled. The direct gaze must understand. But boldness and skill are not the same. Boldness is an expression. Skill is a foundation. Boldness can be empty and still sound full. It can be all shine and no depth. A mask with perfect posture. A trumpet with no melody. Skill does not always announce itself. It arrives quietly, builds slowly, proves itself over time. It has no need to shout. It is enough on its own. Confidence can be painted on like war paint, and many do paint it, with clever words, with posture rehearsed, with names dropped and titles shown. Boldness becomes performance, and that performance is convincing, until the stage changes, until reality asks for something deeper than tone. Masks can smile. Masks can stare. Masks can command rooms and turn heads. But when the moment requires more than image, masks fall silent. Skill begins where boldness ends. It begins when no one is looking, when attention no longer fuels the flame, when results are asked for, not just declarations. The world rewards boldness because it is easy to spot, but skill is harder. Skill lives in repetition, in quiet mastery, in practice behind the scenes, in failure absorbed and folded into strength. Skill does not need the center of the room. It simply needs space to do what it knows how to do. Boldness is sometimes just insecurity in costume. The louder it speaks, the more it hides. Some shout to cover the silence of their doubt. Others charge forward to outrun their fear. The mask of confidence is sold everywhere, worn everywhere, praised everywhere. But what it hides varies wildly. True skill can be soft. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't always impress at first glance. But it holds. It holds when pressure builds. It holds when plans collapse. It holds when boldness flees. And in those moments, the difference becomes clear. Not all who appear certain are correct. Not all who hesitate are lost. Hesitation can be wisdom weighing its options. Doubt can be humility sharpening the blade. Silence can be a sign of strength, not fear. But boldness fears stillness. It rushes to speak, to move, to own the moment, because it cannot bear the risk of being unseen. There is nothing wrong with boldness when it is rooted in truth, when it is an extension of understanding, not a substitute for it. But when boldness is hollow, it misleads. It becomes a compass with no magnet. It points, but does not know where. In the quiet of late moments, when the show has ended and the room is empty, only skill remains. Boldness has no one left to perform for. Masks grow heavy, and the work asks to be done. The hand with calluses knows more than the one with applause. The voice that speaks last may carry more than the one that spoke first. The one who watches, listens, reflects, may hold the deeper map. Boldness may begin the journey, but only skill brings it home. Honoring titles over actions, while chairs still collapse under decorated names. A title is a label, a sound, a string of syllables wrapped around a person. It is meant to signify achievement, status, role. It is a shorthand for history. But titles can shine brighter than the substance beneath. They can be polished so often that the reflection blinds. The world loves titles. They're easy to admire, easy to organize, easy to follow. Doctor, professor, CEO, pastor, judge, general, father, author. Names that carry authority before a word is spoken. But titles are not proof. They are promise. And promises are only as good as those who keep them. A chair does not care who sits in it. It holds weight or it does not. And some chairs collapse beneath those who were supposed to be the strongest. A name does not hold a person up. Actions do. Integrity does. The way someone lives does. Decorated names have failed before. Wise titles have spoken foolishly. Honored positions have sheltered cruelty. Authority has been used not as a responsibility, but as a shield. A way to avoid questions. A way to silence challenge. A way to be believed without earning belief. But action is truth. Repeated. Consistent. Measured in impact, not in image. There are those with no title whose hands have healed more than any surgeon. There are those with no degree whose words have taught more than any lecture hall. There are those with no rank who have led more nobly than any general. A title is a door. It opens expectations. But what lives behind that door must still be seen, known, tested. Not all who wear the robe are just. Not all who wear the collar are kind. Not all who sit on the stage have walked the walk. And the higher the pedestal, the more dangerous the fall. It is easy to bow to a name, harder to question it, easy to assume, harder to observe. But truth does not care about the resume. It cares about the results. About the trace a person leaves behind in others. About whether they lifted or crushed, healed or harmed, listened or silenced. Some names are earned. Others are inherited. Some are bought. Some are stolen. But in the quiet moments, when no one's looking, titles fade. The person remains. And the actions speak louder than the letters before their name. Respect is noble. But reverence without reason is dangerous. To honor someone is beautiful. To honor them blindly is a risk. The mind must remain open, even when the title says, close. The eyes must remain watchful, even when the name says, trust. There are broken systems propped up by decorated names. There are injustices signed off by those with stamps of approval. There are decisions made from behind titles that have caused pain that no title can undo. And yet, there are also those who wear their titles with humility, who let their actions rise higher than their name, who remember that the title is not who they are, but what they must live up to. These are the ones who turn power into service, who make the name mean more because of what they do, not because of what they have. But it is the actions that must be watched, always, because names fade, positions change, the applause dies down, and only the echoes of deeds remain. So let the title introduce, but never let it conclude. Let it begin the question, but never let it end the search. Let the chair be tested, not by how it looks, but by what it holds. The name may shine, but the weight still tells the truth. judging depth by surface, like assuming every still lake hides darkness. Stillness is easy to misread. A lake that holds its surface smooth like glass seems to invite interpretation. People look at it and imagine depths too dark to measure, stories too heavy to lift. But smoothness is not a sign of danger, nor is calm a sign of depth. Sometimes stillness is just stillness. Sometimes what appears deep is simply quiet. The mind is drawn to symbols, and still water becomes one, a metaphor for mystery, for hidden truths, for unsaid things. But symbols are not always reality, and assumptions can weigh more than facts. A still lake may be shallow. A turbulent one may be deep. Surface says little on its own, and yet surface is often judged as if it tells the whole story. This mistake reaches further than water. People carry stillness too. A quiet person is often assumed to be profound or cold. A composed face mistaken for detachment or depth. But some are quiet because they are listening, others because they are lost. Some people smile and carry storms inside. Others frown and carry peace. The surface tells only the shape, never the substance. Assuming depth from stillness is romantic, but it is still assumption. And assuming darkness beneath it reveals more about the one who assumes than about the lake itself. A person trained to expect pain will find it in any silence. A heart taught to fear will look at the calm and prepare for storms. Stillness does not guarantee mystery. Motion does not negate it. Some of the deepest truths are worn on the sleeve. Some of the shallowest hide behind long pauses and elegant phrases. Depth is not a performance. It is not a posture. It is the weight behind the word, not the word itself. Judgment by surface is fast, but it is rarely fair. It skips the need to sit, to ask, to listen. It trades the long path for a glance and calls it understanding. But understanding asks for more. It asks to look again, to wonder, to wait, to enter, not just observe. Some lakes are clear. They show their bottom like open palms. Others are clouded, not because they're deep, but because their bed is stirred. The water does not speak of value. It only reflects what is above, and hides or reveals depending on what is below. So many are judged by their surface, dismissed because they shimmer in simplicity, feared because they offer no drama, worshipped because they seem unknowable. But real understanding resists this. Real vision looks beyond the light on the water. It senses the temperature, the texture, the truth beneath. Stillness is not the same as silence, and neither is the same as depth. Each carries its own meaning, but none speak for the others. The mistake comes when one is made to represent them all. A still lake is not an answer. It is an invitation. It may be deep. It may be shallow. It may be home to hidden life, or simply reflecting the sky. But only time reveals it. Only attention knows. Let stillness be what it is. Not a mask, not a code, not a signpost. Just stillness. Let surface speak for itself and nothing more. And let depth earn its name not through assumption, but through presence. Choosing novelty over wisdom, though worn keys still turn faithful locks. New things shine. They catch the eye with freshness, with the illusion of better simply because they are different. Novelty walks through the door with confidence, dressed in updates and reinvention, promising more than what came before. And often it is believed. Not because it is better, but because it is new. The mind is drawn to what it hasn't seen. The unfamiliar feels alive. The known feels faded. But wisdom doesn't age like fashion. It doesn't expire with time. It deepens. It refines. The tools used by past hands, the truths carried across generations. These are not obsolete just because the world moves faster now. Worn keys still turn. Old paths still lead home. Familiar things often work not because they resist change, but because they have been shaped by time. They have been tested. They have lasted. Novelty has not yet been proven. It is potential, not proof. Yet novelty seduces. It whispers that what came before is tired, that the old way is slow, boring, broken. It doesn't stop to ask what the old way preserved, what it protected, what it held steady through storm after storm. Some truths arrive in quiet repetition, in habits that keep the soul intact, in teachings handed down not to limit, but to liberate. But those teachings are often skipped over now, traded for something quicker, flashier, easier. As if wisdom must always make room for the next update. But updates don't always improve. Sometimes they only distract. Sometimes they replace what works with what sells. The modern world loves speed. It loves disruption. It does not always love understanding. And so novelty gets mistaken for progress. Innovation for insight. To choose novelty over wisdom is to trade the steady hand for the spinning wheel. It is to leave behind the lantern for the blinking screen. But light is light, and truth is truth. The source matters less than the clarity it brings. Worn keys have fingerprints. They carry the memory of what they've opened before. They fit not just the lock, but the hand. There is comfort in their weight, reliability in their shape. They do not announce themselves, but they serve. Wisdom often works the same way: quiet, unspectacular, proven. It doesn't promise a revolution, only the return to what matters. It doesn't chase attention. It keeps the foundation from cracking. Novelty demands belief before it proves itself. It is forward-looking, not always forward-thinking. It asks to be trusted just because it is unfamiliar. But unfamiliar does not mean better. And better is not always different. There are truths that live in worn books, in old prayers, in recipes cooked 1,000 times, in conversations with elders who speak slowly, because they do not rush what took a lifetime to learn. These are not things to discard just because a new voice speaks louder. The world is full of glittering things that rust, ideas that shine briefly, then fade, movements that bloom fast, then collapse. Wisdom survives these. It may be less exciting, less immediate, but it endures. Worn keys may not look impressive, but they turn the locks, they open the doors, they let in the air, and they do it again and again. Let novelty be welcomed, but not worshipped. Let it offer something real before it replaces what already worked. Let wisdom be honored, not as tradition for tradition's sake, but as survival passed through the fire. Not everything old is wise, but much that is wise has been shaped by time. And what is shaped by time often fits the world better than what is shaped by trend. Let the keys be tested, not tossed. Let the new idea be weighed, not assumed. Let the shine be real, not just reflection. And let truth be chosen, not because it is new, but because it lasts. Thinking yesterday defines tomorrow, though rivers carve new paths overnight. Memory is heavy. It clings to the edges of thought, follows like a shadow, whispers like a song that never quite fades. What happened before begins to feel like the only thing that can happen again. The past becomes prophecy, not because it speaks truth, but because it speaks first. It speaks loud. It has already happened, and what has happened begins to feel inevitable. But rivers shift in the night. They bend, they flood, they change their course without warning. The land remembers their old path, but the water no longer flows there. Nature does not ask permission to change, it simply does. And in that quiet rearrangement, tomorrow becomes something the past never saw coming. Still, the mind returns to what it knows. It builds expectations from old pain. It maps the future with lines traced from history's hands. But those lines are not roads. They are echoes. And echoes cannot predict anything. They can only repeat. To live in the shadow of yesterday is to walk backward into tomorrow. Patterns become cages when they are mistaken for laws. A person wakes up and thinks, Today will be like yesterday, not because it must, but because that is the only story the mind remembers how to tell. But even broken clocks witness new seconds. Even closed flowers bloom again. Even the sky changes face between dusk and dawn. What once hurt may no longer fit. What once worked may no longer serve. What once defined does not have to decide. The river moves, and it moves in silence. The landscape changes even as it sleeps. There are nights that reshape a lifetime. Decisions made in quiet. Courage stirred without audience. A single word spoken differently. A glance held longer. A belief finally released. And everything shifts. Not because the past was erased, but because it was no longer worshipped. The stories once told become fossils. They are not false, but they are no longer living. They can teach, but they cannot lead. The future is not a mirror held to the past. It is an open hand reaching beyond it. Even grief changes shape. Even habits can break. Even the most solid truths from yesterday can melt under new light. What mattered most can be outgrown. What was feared most can be faced. What was never thought possible can quietly become real. Still, the pull of repetition remains strong. There is comfort in assuming tomorrow will match the script already written. But that comfort is often a trap. It prevents new choices. It silences new desires. It narrows the path to something familiar, but no longer alive. Rivers do not ask whether they're allowed to change. They just do. And the world adjusts. So can people. So can choices. So can beliefs. The weight of yesterday does not have to be carried into the morning. Each day arrives without memory. The sun shines whether or not it rained. The air does not remember who was sad, who was lost, who was afraid. It offers breath just the same. Let the story of yesterday stay where it belongs, behind. Let the path bend. Let the water move. Let tomorrow be written not by what was, but by what could be. Taking an exception as collapse, like watching a star blink and calling it fallen. A single crack appears, and the mind rushes to call the whole thing broken. One mistake, and suddenly everything feels ruined. One missed step, and the whole journey is questioned. The mind seeks patterns, but it fears disruption more. And so, it mistakes the exception for the rule, the momentary for the permanent, the flicker for the fall. But stars blink. They vanish for a breath, for a second, for a season. They move behind clouds. They slip behind planets. They hide in the wash of dawn. And yet, they are still there, still burning, still steady, just unseen for a moment. The mind is quick to panic. A plan goes sideways, and it's called a failure. A voice trembles, and it's called unworthy. One disagreement, and love is doubted. One bad day, and the whole life feels off track. But a wobble is not a fall. A pause is not an end. A single exception does not undo the whole. Perfection is a myth told by anxious expectations. And that myth breaks the moment reality breathes. Life is made of variables, not absolutes. Truth dances between the lines, not on top of them. There is no straight line untouched by weather. There is no journey without detour. Still, the mind looks for proof that all is lost. It scans for evidence of collapse. It finds the one thing out of place and lets it mean everything. But everything doesn't break all at once. And most things don't break at all. They bend, they adjust, they wait. One closed door doesn't mean no more doors. One lost hope doesn't mean no more light. One moment of weakness doesn't mean no more strength. The star blinked, but it did not fall. It still burns, unseen but alive. Resilience lives in how the exception is held, whether it becomes the story or just a sentence, whether it writes the ending or just challenges the next chapter. One storm doesn't define the climate. One crack doesn't mean collapse. Sometimes the exception is the lesson, the pause that reveals, the flaw that clarifies, the missed note that teaches the rhythm more fully. It doesn't have to be the end. It can be the echo that makes the next step more intentional. People blink, systems wobble, dreams stall. That is the rhythm of movement. That is the breath of becoming. Nothing stays uninterrupted. Even stars shift in their light. But they continue. And so does life. Taking the exception as collapse is to give it more weight than it asked for. It is to build a house around a momentary wind. But moments pass, and meaning, when chosen gently, can pass with them. Let the star blink. Let the pause come. Let the line wobble. It doesn't mean ruin. It just means change. And change is not collapse. It is the beginning of a new alignment. Let the star breathe. Let the sky stay wide. Let the fallacy fade into the night. Following motion for its own sake, even if it spins in perfect circles. Movement feels like purpose. It creates the illusion of momentum, of progress, of getting somewhere. A body in motion, a mind constantly thinking, a life full of activity. These become signs of success, of productivity, of value. If things are moving, surely something important is happening. If the wheel is spinning, surely the journey is advancing. But motion is not direction. Movement is not meaning. A carousel turns, round and round, beautiful and bright, full of color and sound. And yet it goes nowhere. It returns to its starting point again and again, no closer to any destination. It spins, but it does not travel. And still, from the outside, it looks alive. People chase that kind of motion. Fill calendars, load schedules, pack hours. The days blur with errands, the nights with scrolling. The mind runs through loops of thought, returning to the same anxieties, the same regrets, the same arguments never finished. There is movement everywhere. But where is it going? To follow motion for its own sake is to worship the treadmill. It is to confuse being busy with being fulfilled. It is to mistake exhaustion for accomplishment. But a life of endless spinning leaves no path behind. Only dust, only dizziness. Sometimes stillness is wiser than motion. Sometimes stepping off the wheel reveals the landscape that was always there, unnoticed in the blur. Sometimes pausing uncovers the real reason for moving in the first place. Was it escape? Was it fear of silence? Was it just the habit of speed? Motion can be addicting. It feels like control. It feels like doing something, anything. Because doing nothing is feared. Because rest is mistaken for failure. Because stillness is wrongly labeled as laziness. But motion without reflection is noise without melody. It hums, but it doesn't sing. The world praises the busy, applauds the multitaskers, rewards the constantly connected. But none of that guarantees depth. None of that proves clarity. Movement is easy to see. Meaning is not. Even thoughts can spin. They chase their own tails, disguising repetition as discovery. The same worry returns in new language. The same regret walks different hallways. The same anger wears a new face. But the wheel turns, and the destination never comes. Stillness is not absence. It is presence without panic. It listens instead of reacts. It asks instead of assumes. It allows life to speak back. And sometimes it is the only way to find a way forward. To follow motion simply because it moves is to be led by habit, not heart. It is to surrender direction for the sake of speed. But speed means little if the compass is spinning too. And sometimes standing still is the most radical motion of all. Let the circle break. Let the wheel stop. Let the stillness begin to speak. Equating length with truth, though silence can hold the sharpest edge. Words are weighty. They build presence. They fill silence, claim space, create substance. The more words, the more serious the thought seems. The longer the explanation, the more intelligent it sounds. A wall of language becomes a monument to truth, or so it appears. But length is not proof. It is only a measure of time, not of clarity. A thought dressed in thousands of words may still be hollow. A truth can be buried in explanation so deep it forgets how to breathe. And sometimes the longest speeches are the farthest from honesty. Silence does not mean absence. It means restraint. It means precision. It means the message has already landed and needs no echo. There are truths that do not shout. There are insights that do not stretch. There are understandings so exact they require no ornament. Still, the mind reaches for more. More detail, more explanation, more justification. As if truth needs backup. As if simplicity cannot be trusted. But the sharpest blades do not tremble. They cut once, cleanly. And the deepest truths often arrive with the fewest steps. Length comforts. It gives the illusion of effort. It reassures the listener that much thought has been given. But effort and truth are not the same. Some truths arrive quickly, effortlessly, and completely. And some lies come elaborately woven, impossible to untangle. The louder the justification, the more it can begin to feel like a defense. A shield raised not to share, but to protect. But truth does not fear silence. It does not need armor. It does not need applause. It only needs to be seen. The fear of silence is the fear of doubt. As if saying less means knowing less. As if brevity is a confession of weakness. But silence can be power. It can be presence. It can be the space where the truth stands uncluttered by decoration. Consider the moments that hit hardest. A single sentence. A quiet look. A pause between thoughts. The sigh at the end of an answer. These carry more than paragraphs of reasoning. Not because they explain, but because they reveal. Truth isn't always long-winded. Sometimes it's a whisper. Sometimes a nod. Sometimes a hand held, wordless. Some things are so true they do not need to be said at all. They simply are. To equate length with truth is to forget that clarity often arrives naked, without flourish, without fanfare, just a presence, just a knowing. There is an elegance in restraint, a grace in brevity, a confidence in silence. Words can be powerful, but silence is where they find their echo. And not everything needs to be said for something to be understood. Let the silence speak. Let the words rest. Let the truth arrive, unannounced. Believing numbers speak the whole story, while meaning lives in the quiet between them. Numbers carry weight. They seem solid, objective, impartial. They stack neatly, align perfectly, give the mind something to grip. A graph climbs, a percentage rises, a dollar figure lands, and suddenly, meaning feels delivered. The data speaks, and the truth, it seems, has arrived. But numbers are not truth. They are symbols. Signs pointing toward a shape, not the shape itself. They count what can be counted, but not always what matters. Not the silence between words. Not the tone behind the answer. Not the motive behind the motion. Not the weight of the invisible. A hospital report says 2 lives lost. It does not say what they loved. A chart says, productivity is up. It does not say who is tired. A balance sheet shows profit. It does not show the corners cut to earn it. The data glows, clean and convincing. But meaning often hides where the graph ends. There is a reverence for numbers, as if math cannot lie, as if digits do not bend. But numbers can be chosen, framed, selected. They can be true and still misleading. They can measure activity, not impact. They can capture quantity, but miss the soul. A number says how many people attended, not how they felt. A number says how long someone lived, not how deeply. A number says what was bought, not what was valued. The metric is not the message. The data is not the story. Even in science, meaning lives in the interpretation. Even in finance, value must be weighed by more than gain. Even in education, test scores do not tell who will go on to build, to lead, to heal. They are shadows of something deeper, and shadows shift. The world chases numbers, views, clicks, followers, votes. But what do they mean? Who do they touch? What do they change? Something can be large and empty. Something can be small and sacred. There is wisdom in listening to numbers, but not worshiping them. Let them inform, not define. Let them prompt questions, not end them. Let them be part of the truth, not all of it. Meaning lives in the quiet between them, in the pause before the answer, in the hesitation that doesn't make the chart, in the one person who felt something but didn't raise a hand, in the effort that didn't score but mattered more. Let the numbers speak, but also let the silence speak back. Let the graph be followed by a question. Let the chart be followed by a story. Let the data pause to ask, what have we not counted? And why? Because what counts is not always counted. And what is counted is not always what counts. Trading blame for peace, as if guilt ever built lasting shelter. Blame is sharp, quick. It gives a target to the chaos. It draws lines, creates roles, names the cause. In moments of pain or confusion, blame offers control. This happened because of that. They did this. It's their fault. It feels like clarity, like strength, like justice. But blame is a mirror turned outward. It shows everything but the self. It builds walls. It trades the complexity of understanding for the simplicity of pointing. And in that trade, peace becomes a costume worn over unrest. To blame is to push the burden away. It says, this pain does not belong to me. But the pain remains. It festers behind the accusation. Guilt might land on someone else, but peace never does. Because peace is not built from guilt. It is built from truth. And truth is rarely that simple. Blame breaks relationships. It carves the world into roles, victim and villain. And it leaves no space for healing. Only punishment. Only shame. But shame doesn't rebuild. It burns. And when the smoke clears, nothing has grown. People trade blame for peace like swapping storms for silence. But the silence doesn't soothe. It only hides the thunder for a while. Real peace cannot be built on denial. It requires understanding. And understanding doesn't point, it reaches. Sometimes blame is deserved, but even then, it is not enough. To stop at guilt is to stop at the wreckage. To move forward, something else is needed. Accountability that transforms, not just punishes. Responsibility that rebuilds, not just repents. Blame is fast, peace is slow. Blame is loud, peace is quiet. Blame is public, peace is personal. And yet, the world clings to blame as if it solves something. As if assigning fault ends the cycle. But more often, it continues it. Blame triggers defense. Defense triggers blame. The cycle loops, and nothing heals. To build peace is to let go of the need to win the story, to let go of guilt as a tool, to ask harder questions. What happened beneath what happened? Where did the wound begin? What does this pain ask of us? Not who caused it, but how to hold it. There is courage in saying, this hurt me, and I want to understand, not destroy. There is strength in saying, this broke something, and I want to repair it, not bury it. That path is not paved with guilt. It is walked with humility. Guilt is a heavy thing to carry, and it is heavier when it's used as leverage. A shelter built from guilt always collapses. It cannot hold trust. It cannot hold love. It cannot hold truth. Let blame fall away like old bark. Let peace grow slowly, patiently, from the root of something honest. Not perfect, not painless, but real. Because guilt can shame a person into silence, but only grace invites them to speak. Rejecting doubt as weakness, though bridges rise stronger with tested weight. Doubt is often feared. It is seen as a crack in the armor, a faltering of belief, a pause where there should be resolve. To doubt is to question, and questioning is sometimes mistaken for disloyalty to a cause, a path, a self. The world teaches that strength is sure, unwavering, unshaken. That to doubt is to fall behind, to hesitate is to lose. But bridges are not trusted because they are untested. They are trusted because they have held weight, because the pressure was real and they endured it. Doubt, too, is a kind of weight. It leans on belief. It tests it. It checks to see if what has been built is strong enough to carry what comes next. Doubt is not weakness. It is a signal, a doorway, a necessary breath between conviction and action. It says, look again, feel deeper, ask more. And sometimes, what follows that asking is a stronger answer than before. Sometimes the answer bends. Sometimes it breaks. But whatever remains after doubt is more real than what came before it. To reject doubt is to choose the appearance of strength over the presence of it. It is to walk across a bridge that has never been tested and call it trustworthy. But strength without doubt is like metal that's never bent, shiny but brittle. There are questions that only doubt knows how to ask. Gentle ones like, is this still true? Sharp ones like, whose voice is this really? Silent ones, like the feeling that something isn't quite right, even when it all looks fine on the surface. Doubt is not a betrayal. It is an invitation to build better. The pressure to appear certain makes people hide their questions, but hidden doubt does not disappear. It burrows. It waits. And when unaddressed, it corrodes what it once supported. Far better to speak it. Far better to examine the bridge before the storm comes. Even faith, the deepest kind, walks with doubt. Not in opposition, but in conversation. Faith that has never doubted has never grown. It remains untested and therefore unproven. But faith that has doubted and returned, faith that has wrestled, wept, wandered, that faith can hold weight. People who admit their doubt often seem softer, but softness is not fragility. Softness bends. Fragility breaks. A person who can say, I don't know, is stronger than one who clings to answers too tightly to let the truth through. A bridge isn't strong because it stands still. It's strong because it was built to move, to flex, to respond to tension. The same is true of the mind, and the heart, and belief. They are meant to bend and recover, not shatter or rust from fear. Let doubt come. Let it walk beside conviction. Let it ask what needs to be asked. Let it press gently on the structure of the self, not to destroy, but to strengthen. Because what holds under doubt will surely hold under everything else. Expecting logic in all actions, though emotion often drives with hidden hands. Logic is clean. It follows lines. If this, then that. A reason for every action. A cause for every effect. It is comforting in its clarity. It builds patterns, predicts outcomes, makes sense of the senseless. The world prefers things to fit, to add up, to be explainable. Logic offers that promise. But people are not made of formulas. They are made of fire and fog, of memory and longing, of wounds still healing and hopes still forming. And beneath the crisp surface of reason, emotion moves like an underground river, often unseen, always shaping. To expect logic in all actions is to look only at the footprints and never at the weather that caused them. It is to see what someone did, but not what they carried when they did it. The mind wants stories to be tidy, but people are not tidy. People are wild gardens, growing where no one expected. A decision may seem irrational from the outside, but from within, it might be the only thing that felt safe. A word spoken in anger may have logic wrapped inside it, but wrapped so tightly in fear or grief that it could not be untangled in time. Emotion often acts first. Logic explains after. There is a kind of honesty in emotion that logic cannot reach. The tear that falls without permission. The joy that bursts without explanation. The instinct to protect, to run, to stay. These are not reasoned choices. They are human ones. But emotion hides too. It wears the mask of control. It dresses in logic to appear acceptable. People defend their feelings with arguments. They justify their needs with numbers. But beneath it all, the driver is still the heart, still the ache, still the hope that remains unnamed. Even the most rational plans are seated in desire. Even the most calculated choices carry a whisper of want. Logic maps the path, but emotion chooses the destination. To expect only logic is to misunderstand what it means to be human. It is to see someone cry and ask why, when the truth is, because. It is to see someone freeze and say explain, when the truth is, I can't yet. Understanding requires more than equations. It asks for empathy, for patience, for the willingness to sit beside a story that doesn't resolve neatly, to feel instead of fix, to witness instead of solve. Logic explains the shape. Emotion explains the shadow. Both are needed. But when one is ignored, the picture becomes incomplete. The world is built on both, science and song, engineering and art, justice and mercy. No bridge stands without structure. No home stands without warmth. The hands must build, but the heart must guide. Let logic lead where it can, but let emotion speak where it must. Let the hidden hands be seen, not as weakness, but as truth. And let the understanding deepen, not in spite of emotion, but because of it. Letting one stumble rewrite the journey, as if a single misstep maps the whole road. There is a heaviness that follows a fall, not just in the body, but in the story. A slip becomes a sentence. A mistake becomes a mirror. And suddenly, everything that came before feels forgotten, replaced by the echo of one moment that did not go as planned. The mind does this. It freezes the stumble, frames it, replays it. It forgets the steps that were steady. It forgets the miles already walked. One crack in the road becomes the whole road. One misstep becomes the map. But a journey is never a single moment. It is movement. It is continuity. It is made of stumbles and recoveries, wrong turns and rediscovered paths. The road is not defined by where it breaks, but by where it leads. And yet, the mind is drawn to the moment of failure. It assigns it meaning. It wraps it in shame. That slip meant I wasn't ready. That pause meant I wasn't strong. That fall meant I never should have started. But slips are part of walking. Silence is part of speaking. Hesitation is part of courage. A stumble does not undo a journey. It reveals its shape. It shows the edge, the cost, the depth of commitment. A person who stumbles is still a traveler, still moving, still seeking. Perfection demands clean steps. Life does not. Life asks for continuation, for compassion, for the ability to begin again. To treat the stumble not as the definition, but as a moment, a breath, not the full voice. Think of a song. One wrong note does not ruin the melody. It becomes part of the memory, part of the humanity. The truth of a song is not in its flawlessness, but in the emotion it carries, even when the voice breaks. The same is true for a life. One mistake does not mean failure. One day does not mean destiny. One regret does not erase the good that came before, or the good still waiting to arrive. The map is longer. The road still goes on. There is tenderness in resilience, in saying, yes, I slipped, but I will walk on. In knowing, this moment is part of the story, not the whole of it. In refusing to let the bruise become the biography. Let the stumble teach. Let it guide. But do not let it rename the path. The road is bigger than this. The sky is still wide, and the journey is far from finished. Believing multitasking creates more, even as thoughts pile and fall over each other. There is a pressure to do everything at once, to become many versions of a self in the same breath, to split attention like light through a prism, hoping it still shines true. But what scatters does not always serve. What splits does not always expand. Multitasking promises more done, more achieved, more handled. But beneath the promise is a fracture, a tearing of focus, a rushing of the soul. And when the pieces pile too high, they fall. The mind is not a machine. It does not switch cleanly from one task to another. It carries residue. It holds on to threads. Every shift leaves behind a shadow, a cost. The more plates are spun, the more likely they are to shatter, not from weakness, but from being asked to move too fast, for too long. True presence resists division. It asks to be all in, even briefly. A thought pursued to its end. A conversation held without checking the clock. A task completed without interruption. These are rare now, and because they are rare, they are sacred. Multitasking is often celebrated. It is painted as power. But it can become noise, mental clutter, a mind chasing too many tracks to notice the one that mattered. Depth is lost in the pursuit of speed. Connection fades in the scramble for control. Even thoughts trip over each other. Half-written ideas pile up like pages torn before the ink dries. Feelings half-felt become irritations. Words half-heard become misunderstandings. Nothing lands fully, and the self is stretched too thin to notice. There is peace in single attention, in choosing one thing, in letting the mind walk instead of sprint, in giving the moment the full weight of awareness. Not because it is the only thing that matters, but because it is the only thing happening now. Multitasking often comes not from strength, but from fear. The fear of missing something. The fear of falling behind. The fear that rest will cost too much. But in trying to hold everything, the hands close around nothing. Slowness is not weakness. Focus is not luxury. Monotasking, choosing one thing, doing it well, is an act of quiet rebellion in a world that demands too much, too fast, too often. Let the thoughts spread out. Let them breathe. Let them speak one at a time. Let the mind move not like a crowd in panic, but like a river in rhythm. More is not always more. Sometimes it is less clarity, less meaning, less joy. Let the self return to one step, one task, one breath, and watch how everything changes. Confusing speed with direction, like running fast without knowing where. Speed feels like power. Speed feels like power. It pulses in the muscles, in the mind, in the rush of checking boxes and closing tabs and keeping up. The faster something moves, the more important it must be. The faster someone works, the more successful they must be. Motion becomes meaning. Momentum becomes purpose. But direction doesn't come from speed. A blur still means nothing if it's circling itself. A train can run at full throttle toward the wrong destination and still arrive exactly where it shouldn't. Speed alone is not wisdom. It is just motion, often frantic, often loud, often praised. Running fast feels good. It feeds the illusion of control. It makes it seem like things are happening. But if the question where has not been asked, then speed is just performance. A dance with no music. A map with no compass. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes not from hard work, but from running without knowing why. A fatigue not born of effort, but of aimlessness. Of spinning in circles that once looked like progress. The road underfoot matters less than the road ahead, and the road ahead is shaped by intention, not inertia. Still, The world rewards pace. Quicker is better. First is best. There is pride in being busy. There is status in being tired. But none of it answers the question, am I going where I mean to go? Direction is quiet. It whispers. It requires stopping, reflecting, listening. It often feels inefficient. It often asks for less, not more. But direction saves. It spares the soul from spending itself on things that will not matter. Even rivers do not rush without aim. They curve, they wind, they slow. And still, they arrive. Even the wind carries purpose, invisible but precise. But people often move like gusts, hoping that the feeling of force will make up for the lack of course. It is possible to go fast in the wrong life, to succeed at the wrong goals, to achieve everything and still feel lost. Because velocity means nothing without vision, and action means nothing without awareness. The question is not, how fast are things moving? The question is this the way? Is this where peace lives? Is this where meaning waits? And if not, then speed only deepens the distance from what matters. Let the pace slow. Let the breath stretch. Let the compass return to the hand. There is more courage in pausing than in pushing forward blind. There is more strength in choosing than in racing. Let the path be chosen, not chased. Let the feet follow, not flee. Let direction define the journey, not speed. Tying intelligence to results, forgetting how some trees grow wide without fruit. Results are visible. They are measurable. They are admired. They show up on report cards, bank statements, resumes, and timelines. They say, here is proof. Here is success. Here is intelligence, because something was produced. But not all minds bear fruit in ways the world knows how to count. Some grow quietly. They stretch out, deep and wide, learning not to perform, but to understand. They take their time. They grow without blooming on command. They think in seasons, not in deadlines. The world ties intelligence to output, to prizes, to problem solving. But some of the wisest minds do not produce. They perceive. They see patterns others miss. They feel meanings others skip. They sit with paradox instead of solving it. They grow insight instead of industry. A tree without fruit is not broken. It may be offering something else. Shade, shelter, stillness, roots that hold the earth in place. Not everything that matters is visible, and not every gift can be measured in what it gives away. Some people bloom late, others bloom inward, others not at all, not because they can't, but because they are becoming forests, not farms. Their intelligence grows in ways that resist being harvested. Their ideas are not made for output, but for observation, for presence, for reflection. Results are often shaped by access, by chance, by context. Intelligence, by contrast, is often shaped by struggle, by curiosity, by what one learns to carry when nothing blooms. Some of the most thoughtful people have never received awards for it. Some of the most brilliant ideas were never finished, only felt. To equate intelligence with result is to reduce thinking to performance, to make insight a contest. But insight is not always a race. It is not always a goal. Sometimes it is simply a question held long enough for silence to answer. There are minds that move slowly, not because they are dull, but because they are deep. There are minds that hesitate, not because they lack ideas, but because they care about which ones are true. There are minds that never bear fruit the world can see, but change the soil beneath everyone's feet. Not every thought ends in something tangible. Not every understanding becomes a product. But understanding still matters. Knowing still matters. Not all intelligence must impress. Some intelligence simply watches, and from that watching, the world becomes gentler. Let the fruit be honored, but let the tree be seen too. Let the shade count, Let the presence count. Let the intelligence that does not announce itself still be trusted. Because some trees grow wide, some roots go deep, some minds are forests, and not everything needs to bloom to be wise. Letting first impressions harden into truth, though skies change color by the hour. The mind loves simplicity. It seeks clarity, quickly. The first glimpse, the first word, the first moment, it captures those and begins to draw conclusions. Like freezing a frame of a film and calling it the whole story. First impressions feel sharp, clean, certain, and so they harden. They become assumptions, then beliefs, then something that no longer gets questioned. But people are not moments. They are skies, changing, shifting, turning color hour by hour, depending on light, on wind, on season. A sky is not less real when it storms, nor less bright when it darkens. It simply changes. And the truth of someone cannot be held entirely in the weather of one interaction. First impressions are formed before understanding has a chance to breathe. A glance, a tone, a hesitation. Something in the face, the clothes, the timing. The mind picks it up, fast, and calls it knowledge. But knowledge takes time. First impressions are just shadows. They mimic shape, not substance. A nervous voice may be mistaken for dishonesty. A quiet gaze mistaken for arrogance. A tired smile mistaken for indifference. But the reasons beneath these expressions run deeper than what the surface shows, and surfaces shift. The danger comes when the impression settles too deeply, when it becomes fixed, when the mind says, "I've seen enough," before it truly has. Then the person becomes a version of themselves frozen in that first light, and every new thing they do is filtered through a lens shaped long before understanding. Judgment becomes a habit. Curiosity fades. And the space for someone to grow, to unfold, to reveal, becomes narrow. But just as a sky can go from storm to golden in minutes, so can people. So do people. Let first impressions stay soft. Let them be beginnings, not conclusions. Let them breathe, not bind. Watch the sky longer before naming the weather. Stay long enough to see the change. The truth of someone often reveals itself slowly, in second glances, in third conversations, in quiet pauses when neither party is trying to impress. What's real comes after the performance fades. What's true waits until the rush of interpretation slows. So let impressions come. Let them whisper. But don't let them shout. Don't let them lock the door. Because people are not the color they first show. They are the whole sky. And skies were made to change. Reading absence as guilt, while even shadows disappear in the noon sun. Silence is easy to misread. So is stillness. So is distance. When someone says nothing, the mind begins to fill in the blanks. And often, it fills them with guilt, with suspicion, with a quiet accusation. Why didn't they respond? What are they hiding? Why did they leave? But absence is not always avoidance. It is not always a confession. It is not always a sign of wrongdoing. Sometimes absence is just absence, and silence is just silence. A breath, a pause, a space between. Even shadows vanish when the sun is high. Not because the object is gone, but because the light has changed. The same is true of people. They do not always cast presence in expected ways. Their silence does not always mean secrecy. Their stillness does not always mean guilt. The mind wants patterns. It searches for reasons. And where there is space, it often fills it with worry. They didn't say anything, so they must be guilty. They weren't there, so they must not care. But absence can be made of many things. Of grief, of fear, of needing time, of being overwhelmed, of simply not knowing what to say. There are moments when stepping back is not betrayal, but preservation. When not answering is not evasion, but waiting for the right words. When distance is not rejection, but rest. To assume guilt from absence is to forget the complexity of the human heart. Even nature disappears. The moon vanishes during the day. The stars fade, though they are still burning. The wind goes quiet, though the air still moves. So do people. They retreat. They fall silent. But that silence often holds more truth than a rushed explanation. Absence should be held with questions, not conclusions. With patience, not punishment. Where are they? What might they be carrying? What don't I see yet? Because presence is not always the truest sign of care. And absence is not always the loudest confession. Sometimes absence is the shape someone makes when they are overwhelmed, when they do not want to burden others, when they are trying to process, not hide. Sometimes it is simply the silence before healing begins. Let the mind wait. Let it resist the urge to accuse. Let it sit with the not knowing, not to cast blame, but to make space for return, for conversation, for complexity. Even shadows disappear, but the sun still shines. Believing louder cries hold more pain, when even silent weeping can flood a soul. Pain does not always raise its voice. Sometimes it doesn't speak at all. It curls inward, quiet as breath. It sits behind steady eyes and practiced smiles. It nods at all the right times. It laughs when laughter is expected. And still, it floods the soul. There is a kind of hurt that makes no sound, not because it is small, but because it has learned that no one hears, or because words are too clumsy for what it feels, or because it has grown used to being quiet, afraid that being loud would only deepen the wound. Louder cries draw attention. They demand space, and sometimes they deserve it. Sometimes they carry truths too long ignored. But volume is not the only measure of pain. Sometimes what whispers holds more weight. Sometimes what doesn't show leaves deeper scars. Grief often moves in silence. It lingers in the way someone hesitates before speaking, in the way they look away when something beautiful happens, in the way they walk more slowly than before. Grief doesn't always wail. Sometimes it simply watches. Suffering wears many masks. Some cry aloud. Others hold their breath. Some reach for help. Others fold their hands and sit quietly, because the asking feels harder than the hurting. And the danger is in thinking only the loud ones need tending. There are people who hold entire oceans behind calm expressions, who survive each day by pretending they're not drowning, who have learned how to carry pain without spilling it, not because it is light, but because it is theirs. To measure pain by its decibel is to miss those who ache in silence. To assume volume means severity is to leave the gentlest wounds unseen. And yet, the softest sorrows often go the deepest. The quietest cries often echo longest. Some pain does not ask to be fixed. It asks to be witnessed, not analyzed, not solved, just seen, just held, just sat with in the stillness. Because not all healing begins with speaking. Sometimes it begins with presence. Listen for the silences, the pauses, the shift in someone's tone, the story that almost got told, the moment someone almost asked for help but changed their mind. Listen there, love there, because the heart doesn't always shout when it breaks. Sometimes it just stops singing. And that, too, is a kind of scream. Favoring precision over clarity, forgetting sharp edges often blur meaning. Precision is admired. It sharpens language. It draws tight lines. It names exactly what something is, down to its smallest parts. Precision makes things neat, tidy, measurable. It creates the illusion of mastery, of control. But clarity is different. Clarity is the ability to see, not just in detail, but in truth, in feeling, in resonance. Clarity doesn't always come from cutting things smaller. Sometimes it comes from stepping back, from softening the gaze, from letting something breathe in its full shape. The mind often prefers what is sharp. Exact numbers, definite categories, clear-cut answers. But life is rarely so clean. Meaning is rarely so obedient. The sharper the words, the more they risk missing the full curve of the truth. A definition may be precise and still not capture what something means. A diagnosis may be accurate and still not tell the story of someone's suffering. A rule may be perfect in language and still fail to guide in life. Precision can describe without understanding. Sharpness cuts. But sometimes it cuts too deeply. It divides things that are meant to be held together. Emotion from logic, intuition from reason, spirit from body. Precision can make things legible and less alive. Clarity is wider. It allows for contradiction. It allows for feeling and form to coexist. It makes room for the gray, for the layered, for the unsaid. It speaks with gentleness. It doesn't always have the right word, but it holds the right meaning. In conversation, the need to be precise can drown the need to connect. The perfect word becomes more important than the message. The sharp reply becomes more valuable than the soft understanding. But no one is convinced by cold accuracy. People remember what moved them, not what diagrammed them. Meaning often comes in metaphor, in gesture, in tone. It rides on stories, not statistics. It lives in what was implied, not always in what was named. And clarity listens for that. It does not dissect, it reflects. To favor precision too much is to forget that language is a map, not the terrain. That words are tools, not truths. That communication is not about showing off knowledge. It's about making connection easier. Sometimes, the simplest phrase holds more clarity than the most exact term. Sometimes, a single look says more than a thesis. Sometimes, the clearest way forward is not the most technical, but the most human. Let the edges soften. Let meaning breathe. Let precision serve clarity, not replace it. Because language, at its best, is not a scalpel. It is a bridge. Taking praise as evidence, while empty hands applaud the loudest. Applause is loud. It echoes in halls, in hearts, in headlines. It feels good. It sounds like arrival, like approval, like truth confirmed. Praise is warm. It wraps around effort like a blanket, tells the soul it did well, that it is enough. But not all applause means understanding. Not all praise means truth. Empty hands often clap the loudest, not because they hold something valuable, but because they need to make noise. Some cheer because it's expected. Some applaud because others do. Some offer praise not as reflection, but as habit, automatic, unexamined. The mind is quick to anchor itself in praise, to take it as confirmation. They said it was good, so it must be. They clapped, so I must belong. But belonging built only on noise is fragile. Praise, if not tested, becomes a drug, soothing in the moment, empty the next. True praise is quiet. It is specific. It sees, it knows, it reflects. It does not need to echo in crowds. It does not need to inflate. It simply affirms. Not to impress, but to witness. But people often chase the loud kind, the kind that fills rooms and comment sections and performance reviews. And in doing so, they begin to shape themselves for applause, not for truth. They perform for noise, not for meaning. And the cost is depth. Some of the deepest work goes unnoticed. Some of the most honest effort is met with silence, not because it lacks worth, but because it defies trends. It does not dazzle. It does not dance for attention. It simply is, and it endures. Praise is not a compass unless it is paired with understanding. Applause is not a mirror unless it reflects something real. To live by praise alone is to let the world decide what matters. And the world often claps for the wrong things. There are hands that clap to be seen, words that praise to be safe, smiles that affirm to avoid discomfort. But the absence of criticism does not mean the presence of value, and the sound of many does not mean the wisdom of any. Let praise be received, but not worshipped. Let it be questioned. Let it be weighed. Let it serve truth, not replace it. Because not every cheer confirms meaning, and not every silence denies it. Sometimes, the best work is done when no one is watching, and sometimes, that's when it's most true. Mistaking cynicism for insight, though bitter roots rarely bear wisdom. Cynicism walks with a certain confidence. It speaks in finalities, in knowing smirks, in quiet shrugs. It sees through things. It names the flaws. It stays one step removed, untouched. From the outside, it looks like clarity. It sounds like insight. But often, it's just protection. To be cynical is to stop before wonder can begin. It is to call meaning an illusion before it has a chance to unfold. It is to say nothing matters because it is safer than hoping something might. Cynicism wears the coat of intelligence, but inside, it is often disappointment left untreated. Wisdom requires openness. It allows for mystery. It risks faith in something that might not be returned. But cynicism plays it safe. It refuses to be moved. It pretends that seeing the worst is the same as seeing the truth. But bitter roots rarely bear fruit. They grip tight, grow twisted, hold everything in. And the insight that emerges from them often lacks compassion. It lacks the warmth that gives truth its power. It cuts, but does not heal. It sees, but does not understand. True insight is tender. It sees the flaw and keeps loving. It sees the problem and still hopes for repair. It notices the cracks, but doesn't confuse them for collapse. Cynicism skips this. It declares endings before the story finishes. It calls things broken just to avoid the heartbreak of trying to fix them. The world is quick to reward cynicism. It sounds smart. It sounds safe. It makes people feel clever, protected from the sting of being wrong. But wisdom is not afraid of being wrong. Wisdom is willing to begin again. Some of the most insightful voices are gentle. They don't need to mock. They don't need to harden. They speak softly because they've seen suffering up close and know how easily hearts can close. They speak with care, not with cuts. Cynicism has no room for wonder, no room for the unproven, no space for joy that hasn't yet earned a reason. But joy is not always rational. Meaning is not always neat. And the deepest truths are often felt before they are understood. To confuse cynicism with depth is to believe that peeling something apart is the same as knowing it. But knowing requires more. Knowing asks for love, for effort, for patience, for the willingness to stay. Let cynicism soften. Let it be questioned. Let the mind open again, not to be naive, but to be free. Because insight without heart becomes ice, and wisdom, real wisdom, always blooms warm. Demanding one answer when some questions were born only to echo. Some questions do not want to be solved. They do not arrive with riddles to be cracked or puzzles to be completed. They arrive to open space, not to fill it. They stretch the soul by refusing to shrink into certainty. But the mind, taught to seek finality, begins to demand an answer. Something definite, something useful, something it can hold up like a certificate. But not all questions are meant to resolve. Some are made to resonate, like bells rung in a cathedral, heard not to end, but to echo. These questions widen thought. They deepen presence. They are not there to end the search. They are the search. The mind is impatient with uncertainty. It wants to tie things down, label them, place them on shelves. It wants truth like a sharp edge, clean, simple, final. But truth is often curved. It lives in tension, in mystery, in things that cannot be closed without doing violence to their depth. To demand one answer is to demand closure where openness belongs. Some questions speak many languages. They carry layers. Their meaning changes depending on when they are asked, who hears them, how deeply one is willing to sit inside them. What is love? What does it mean to forgive? What happens after death? Why do we suffer? These are not riddles, they are doorways. And each person who walks through finds something different. Each answer is a mirror of the one asking. And still, the world insists on solutions. Answers in bullet points, certainties for sale. But certainty is not always clarity, and clarity is not always final. To hold a question without needing to close it, that is a kind of wisdom. To let the question echo, to let it bounce against the walls of the heart, to let it stretch thought instead of narrowing it. Some questions are like constellations, seen clearly but never touched. They guide, not by being grasped, but by being followed. They do not exist to be solved. They exist to pull the gaze upward. Let the echo live. Let the question ring. Let the silence between answers speak. Because not everything that asks to be held asks to be answered. Assuming choice means freedom, though too many doors can trap a wanderer. Choice is often worshipped, held up like a banner of liberty. The more choices, the more free, so the world says. Doors upon doors, options upon options. Pick your path, pick your life. Choose again, and again, and again. But choice without direction becomes a labyrinth. A place with no center. A hallway with no stillness. Too many doors do not always lead to freedom. Sometimes they lead to paralysis, to regret, to the quiet ache of never knowing if the other choice was better. A wanderer is not always lost because they lack direction. Sometimes they are lost because the map offers too many turns. Every path asks something. Every option whispers, "What if?" Every open door casts the shadow of all the others left behind. Freedom is not found in endless choosing. It is found in meaning, in intention, in choosing once, then staying long enough to live the choice deeply. 1,000 shallow paths cannot replace the depth of one true one. Choice becomes a burden when it lacks anchoring, when no value guides it, when it is driven by fear of missing out rather than desire to belong. Then freedom becomes illusion, movement mistaken for agency, indecision mistaken for liberty. Even the wind must choose a direction to carry anything. Too many choices can distract from asking the real question. What matters? What do I want to grow, not just taste? What is worth giving myself to completely? There is a stillness that comes from commitment, a relief, a resting of the mind. Not because there are no other doors, but because this one is enough. Because this path, though imperfect, will be walked with presence. Some of the most trapped hearts are those surrounded by options. Some of the most grounded are those who chose once and chose well. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but purposefully. Let freedom mean more than motion. Let it mean alignment. Let it mean fewer doors and fuller rooms. Let the wanderer stop not because they've exhausted the paths, but because one of them finally felt like home. Trusting memory as truth, though it sketches rather than reflects. Memory feels like a mirror, something fixed, something faithful. A vault of what was, waiting to be opened. A reliable record of moments lived and choices made. But memory does not reflect. It interprets. It sketches. It recolors, reshapes, redacts. It is less a mirror than it is a canvas painted in hindsight, touched by emotion, altered by time. The mind does not store events the way they happened. It stores the impression of them. The temperature of the room, the fear or joy that clung to the moment, the way the light hit a face, the sound that came just before the words. These things blend, and what returns is not the moment itself, but the mind's recreation of it. Two people live the same moment and remember it differently, not because one is wrong, but because memory bends to the angle of the witness. It is shaped by perspective, by pain, by longing, by what someone needed the story to be in order to survive it. Still, the mind trusts it. I remember it, therefore it happened. But memory is not evidence, it is experience filtered through the self. And the self is not static. It changes. Which means memory does too. Sometimes memory softens the sharpness, to protect. Other times it sharpens the soft, to punish. Sometimes it forgets what it cannot hold. Sometimes it invents what it cannot face. The mind fills in blanks without asking permission. And over time, the invented parts feel just as real as the lived ones. This does not mean memory is meaningless, but it means memory is a story, one version among many. It is a truth, not the truth. And to treat it as absolute is to risk building one's world on sand that shifts beneath the feet. Arguments erupt over remembered words. Relationships rupture over remembered wounds. But sometimes the question is not, what happened? But what has been remembered? And why this way? Memory is as much a mirror of current emotion as it is of past experience. Let memory speak, but let it be cross-examined. Let it be listened to, but not worshipped. Let it be compared, questioned, softened with compassion. Because sometimes the past isn't what hurts, it's the way it's remembered. And just as the present can heal, so too can memory. Believing consistency equals honesty, even as lies repeat until they feel like home. Consistency comforts. It looks like reliability, sounds like truth, feels like something to hold on to. If a story stays the same, it must be true. If a person says the same thing over and over, they must be honest. If a belief never shifts, it must be stable. But lies can repeat too. And repetition, though it creates rhythm, does not create reality. Even an untruth, told enough times, begins to feel like something remembered. Even a myth, repeated, can feel like history. The mind mistakes consistency for integrity because it craves order. It wants things to make sense, even when they don't. A lie that's consistent wears the disguise of conviction. It doesn't wobble. It doesn't falter. It walks the same path every time, confident. And because it's familiar, it becomes convincing. But familiarity is not the same as honesty. Rehearsed words can sound sincere. Practiced stories can pass as proof. Some people cling to falsehoods because they no longer know how to live without them. Lies become language. They become shelter. They become identity. And after long enough, even the speaker forgets where truth ended and story began. The danger is not only in being lied to, it is in wanting the lie to be true. Because it's easier, because it's cleaner, because it saves the pain of reconsidering everything. And so consistency becomes a stand-in for truth. And the lie settles in, not as an intruder, but as a resident. Real honesty often changes. It evolves. It contradicts itself. Not because it is false, but because it is alive. It allows for new information. It bends when it learns. It says, I was wrong, which a rehearsed lie never does. Honesty isn't always neat. Sometimes it breaks rhythm. Sometimes it pauses. Sometimes it hurts. But it has a heartbeat. It lives in response, not repetition. It listens. It adjusts. It grows. A belief held too tightly may be masking a fear. A story never questioned may be hiding a crack. A truth that never shifts may not be truth at all, but a script. Let consistency be respected, but not mistaken for integrity. Let repetition be noticed, but not confused with reality. Let the truth be free to move, to breathe, to contradict what was once thought true. Because lies don't need to change to survive. But truth often does. Insisting blame must land, like needing thunder to justify the lightning. Blame seeks an anchor, a place to point, a place to land. When something breaks, the mind looks for a cause. When something hurts, it wants to know who or what made it so. Pain without a culprit feels unmanageable. Chaos without a reason feels unjust. And so blame becomes a balm. Not because it heals, but because it names. And naming feels like control, like resolution, like a circle closed. But not all hurt comes with a villain. Not all broken things were broken by a hand. Sometimes lightning strikes, and no one called it down. Still, the need for blame presses forward. Someone must be responsible, even if that someone is the self. Even if the accusation is forced, stretched, invented. Thunder must follow lightning. Damage must have a direction. Suffering must be explained. But life does not always follow rules of courtroom logic. Not every consequence arrives with an explanation. Not every loss is the result of wrongdoing. Sometimes people drift apart with no betrayal. Sometimes doors close with no push. Sometimes storms just come. To insist that blame must land is to miss the truth of some moments. That they are unclean, unclear, not owned by any one hand, but shaped by many small wins. Timing, misunderstanding, fatigue, unspoken fears, these weave together until no single thread can be named. Blame flattens complexity. It makes a scapegoat out of what was likely a constellation. And in doing so, it robs the pain of its full depth. The truth becomes smaller, neater, and less real. Some things need accountability. Yes. But not everything needs a target. Sometimes it is enough to say, "This hurt. This happened. This was." And let the story stay open. Let it float a little. Let the storm pass without naming a thunderer. Lightning does not explain itself. It strikes, and the world shifts. The air stills. And only later, if ever, comes the sound. But the sound does not cause the light. It only follows it. Let blame fall away when it serves only the illusion of closure. Let silence hold the space where no answers come. Let healing happen even without justice. Not because justice doesn't matter, but because not all storms ask for it. And not all pain points a finger. Expecting effect to follow cause, while dreams often arrive before the longing. The mind wants order. It believes in the story of beginnings, middles, and ends. This happened, so that happened. A seed is planted, and then a tree grows. A question is asked, and then an answer comes. A wish is made, and only then does fulfillment arrive. But life is not always so obedient. Sometimes the dream comes first, before the reason, before the ache. A vision appears, uninvited. A thought rises with no origin. A joy flickers that has no name. And only later does the heart grow toward it. Only later does the longing take shape. Cause and effect do not always march in order. Sometimes the effect whispers backward in time. Sometimes the soul sees a future before the present knows what to desire. And to demand logic in these moments is to miss their wonder. The mystery of becoming is not linear. The child dreams of the ocean before ever tasting salt. The poet writes of grief before ever losing. The stranger feels familiar before any word is spoken. The world folds inward on itself like this, layered, looping, alive. Dreams arrive not always as rewards, but as seeds. They do not wait for permission. They do not need a cause. They appear, soft and shining, long before the hands are ready to hold them. And this unsettles the thinking mind. The mind wants to trace a line. This happened because of that. It wants effect to follow cause like shadow follows form. But dreams dance in reverse. They cast the shadow before the light. They call to what hasn't happened yet, and in doing so, make it real. Desire often awakens after the dream. The path is often seen only after the destination calls. And to walk forward sometimes means trusting what was felt before it was understood. Let go of the demand for order. Let cause and effect blur into rhythm instead of rule. Let mystery lead. Let longing be something that follows, not just precedes. Because some things are dreamed before they are needed, and some futures arrive before the present has the words to name them. Judging intent by result, though kindness can fail and cruelty can thrive. The world often draws a straight line between what happened and why. If something ended in pain, it must have been meant that way. If a gesture healed, the heart behind it must have been pure. But intent and result are not mirrors. They are separate things. Their paths cross, but they do not always align. A kind word, misunderstood, can cut. A sincere effort can fall short. A generous act can be met with suspicion. And yet, the kindness was real. The care was true. Its result does not undo its origin. Likewise, cruelty sometimes succeeds. The sharpest words can be praised. The most selfish plans can prosper. The intention, poisoned though it was, may go unseen beneath the golden finish. But outcome does not cleanse the hand that caused it. To judge solely by result is to ignore the complexity of the human heart. To believe that the end always reveals the beginning. But people are not math. Life is not an equation. Good intentions can bring bad endings. Bad intentions can be wrapped in charm and rewarded with applause. Still, the mind craves simplicity. It wants to assign blame to failure. It wants to credit only what wins. But doing so forgets the truth of effort. The quiet kindness that gave what it could. The honest mistake that had no malice. The compassion that simply didn't land. Intent lives where no one sees. It lives in the pause before the action, in the trembling hand, in the unspoken word. It does not always survive translation. It does not always carry through the noise of life, but it matters. To understand someone, start not with what happened, but with what was hoped for. Look not only at the outcome, but at the thread that led there. Ask what the heart meant, not just what the world received. And know that even love can miss. Even cruelty can look like success. The truth is more subtle than the scoreboard. Let the result be seen, but let it not be the only measure. Because what a thing becomes does not always reveal what it tried to be. Thinking timing is destiny, forgetting missed trains still lead somewhere. There is a myth that timing is everything, that every opportunity arrives once, perfectly timed, and if missed, it is gone forever. That if a door closes, the future closes with it. That one late step rewrites the entire path. But time is not so strict. It curves, it loops, it returns. And destiny is not bound to a schedule. Missed trains still go somewhere, and so do those who miss them. Sometimes the moment passes, and the world feels smaller. A breath too late. A word unsaid. A choice unmade. And the mind begins to mourn what never was, believing it held the only key to what could be. But timing is not law. It is weather. Sometimes it aligns. Sometimes it shifts. And what is missed may return in a new shape. Or what is gained in its absence may matter more. The idea that destiny arrives only once, on time, on track, in a form the world recognizes, is a cruel story. It ignores how often life redirects, how often the detour holds the very thing the plan was supposed to deliver. Timing can feel like fate, but more often, it's just movement. And movement continues, even after delay, even after silence, even after failure. A missed train might mean more time alone, or a stranger met on the platform, or a new destination, one never considered. It might bring loss, but it might also bring freedom. The story is not always about what was missed. Sometimes it's about what is found because of it. Let go of the myth that the perfect moment slipped away forever. Let go of the belief that the right time had to be that time. There are many timings, many arrivals, many beginnings wrapped in unexpected hours. And sometimes, what seems late is simply what needed more time to be understood. Let the journey continue, even if the train has already left. Because destiny does not live on schedules. It lives in the traveler who chooses to walk anyway. Confusing complexity with wisdom, when some webs are spun only to entangle. Complexity wears the clothes of intelligence. Long sentences, technical language, layer upon layer of thought wrapped tightly around itself. And from a distance, it looks impressive. It feels important. Like depth must live where simplicity cannot reach. But not all complexity is wisdom. Some complexity is camouflage. A web woven not to enlighten, but to obscure, to confuse, to trap, to make something seem profound only because it cannot be easily followed. There is a kind of thinking that stacks ideas like bricks, not to build understanding, but to build walls. And behind those walls, meaning hides, or disappears entirely. Complexity becomes performance, a dance of intellect with no rhythm, a fog that impresses without guiding. Wisdom, on the other hand, seeks clarity, not always simplicity, but honesty, precision, clean lines when possible, and careful curves when not. Wisdom may move through complexity, but it does not cling to it. It comes through the tangle, not from it. Some of the wisest truths are spoken in plain words, not because they lack depth, but because they have nothing to prove. They do not need to dazzle. They only need to reach. And the truth, when it is real, tends to arrive more like water than web. The danger lies in equating confusion with genius, in believing something is wise just because it is hard to understand. But wisdom isn't what confuses. It's what clarifies, what soothes, what steadies the hand and softens the breath. To learn deeply is not to decorate thought with unnecessary weight. It is to remove what isn't needed, to unweave the web, to offer what matters, bare and quiet, without the need for applause. Let complexity be respected, but not mistaken for truth. Let tangled thoughts be unraveled, and let wisdom speak in the fewest words needed, but no fewer. Believing clarity means grasping, though even crystal distorts when held too tightly. Clarity is often imagined as ownership, as something to be possessed. To understand means to hold, to define, to fix in place. And so the mind reaches with tight fingers. It clutches the insight, wraps language around it, names it, boxes it, calls it known. But the tighter the grip, the more distortion begins. Even crystal, perfectly clear when resting in light, bends and blurs when squeezed too hard. Fingers leave prints. Pressure changes angle. What was once simple becomes fractured, not because it changed, but because it was held too tightly. Understanding is not always about containment. Sometimes it is about presence. To see clearly does not mean to possess. It means to perceive without distortion, without rush, without the need to control what is seen. There are truths that shimmer when approached gently, but disappear when demanded. Insights that only arrive when there is space for them to stretch. Questions that speak more clearly when not cornered into a single answer. Grasping is born from fear. The fear of losing the insight, of not knowing, of missing the moment. But clarity isn't something that vanishes when not captured. It remains. It only asks to be respected, to be seen in its own rhythm, not forced into a frame. Let clarity rest, like sunlight through water. Let it shimmer without needing to be held. Let it move, if it must. Let it soften the gaze rather than sharpen the grip. Because some things are not meant to be grasped, only witnessed. And even crystal, when held too tightly, begins to crack. Equating urgency with need, like hearing thunder and packing an umbrella for the soul. Urgency wears a loud voice. It knocks quickly. It speaks in alerts and deadlines and breathless tones. It says now as if now is the only safe time. As if waiting means failure. As if slowing down means losing something vital. And so urgency gets confused with importance. with need, with value. But not everything that moves fast deserves attention. Not everything that demands a response carries meaning. A loud clock is not a sacred one. A thunderclap is not a prophecy. Urgency can be born from fear, from habit, from expectation. It thrives in a world that rewards speed and punishes stillness, where moving quickly is confused with being capable, and saying yes immediately is seen as strength. But the soul does not move that way. The soul moves like tides, like seasons, like seeds turning in dark soil long before they bloom. To mistake urgency for need is to pack for the wrong storm. To arm oneself for thunder when the real work is quiet, internal, slow. To assume that just because something demands action, it deserves it. But real need waits. It does not rush. It does not panic. It stays through silence and asks gently, again and again, until the body listens. It whispers through intuition, not impulse. There are things that feel urgent because they are uncomfortable, not because they are essential. There are messages that feel important only because they are loud, not because they are true. Let the thunder pass without packing the umbrella. Let the body breathe before it decides. Let urgency be questioned before it is obeyed. Because the soul cannot be rushed, and some of the most important things in life will wait patiently for their time to come. Reading doubt as defeat, though the best journeys begin with uncertain steps. Doubt enters like fog. It softens edges. It slows the pace. It brings with it the heavy question, am I sure? And in that moment, everything seems fragile. The plan, the path, the voice inside. Doubt is often mistaken for failure, for weakness, for something to be silenced. But doubt is not defeat. Doubt is the gate, the threshold, the first honest breath before the leap. It does not mean something is wrong. It means something is real. The stakes are high enough to be questioned. The desire is deep enough to be weighed. The soul is awake enough to pause. Certainty can be comforting, but it is not always wise. Some of the worst decisions come cloaked in confidence. Some of the truest lives begin in hesitation. The first step often trembles, not because it lacks courage, but because it carries it. Doubt can be a compass. It invites a second look, a deeper question, a softening of certainty that makes space for clarity to grow. Not to stall the journey, but to guide it with more care. There is no shame in not knowing, no failure in wondering. To ask, what if I'm wrong, is not to falter. It is to reach for understanding. And understanding is the beginning of wisdom. The mountain is climbed one unsure step at a time. The poem is written with words the writer isn't sure belong. The love is given by a heart that isn't certain it will be held. All these begin in doubt and become something real. Let doubt walk beside the dream. Let it question the plan, not to kill it, but to refine it. Let it teach patience. Let it open doors to possibilities not yet considered. Because some journeys do not begin with belief. They begin with a question, and they carry that question all the way home. Favoring ease over truth, while shortcuts often skip the sacred. Ease is tempting. It hums with the promise of peace. It offers the illusion of arrival without the climb. The shortcut through the woods. The summary instead of the book. The polished quote instead of the messy conversation. And the world, in its hunger for quickness, calls ease the new wisdom. But not all ease is freedom, and not all shortcuts lead home. Truth is not always hard, but it is rarely shallow. It often asks for depth, for discomfort, for wandering through questions that cannot be answered in a single breath. It moves slow. It resists being reduced. And in doing so, it protects what is sacred. Shortcuts skip process. They bypass the sweat, the ache, the pause that reveals what matters. And often, what they skip is not excess. It is essence. The story that couldn't be told any other way. the mistake that taught more than the success, the silence that changed everything. There is wisdom in simplicity, but it is earned, not chosen out of impatience. Ease that emerges from understanding is different from ease that replaces it. The former is clarity, the latter is avoidance. The sacred often hides in the inconvenient, in the long version, in the work that takes longer than expected, in the uncomfortable conversation that doesn't end neatly, in the ritual that seems unnecessary until it reveals its meaning. To favor ease over truth is to smooth the stone before reading its markings, to rush past the whisper that could have changed everything. It is to hear only what is pleasant and miss what is profound. Let truth come in its own time. Let the path take the turns it needs. Let difficulty be part of the offering, not because struggle is holy, but because what's real cannot be rushed. Shortcuts may lead somewhere, but often they pass by what the soul came to find. Believing expertise guarantees correctness, forgetting that even compasses can spin. Expertise carries weight. It comes with credentials, titles, years of study. It speaks in polished tones, with practiced certainty, and the world listens. Because expertise seems safe, it seems sure. It promises answers in a world filled with questions. But even the best compass spins when near a magnet. Even the most seasoned voice can drift. Expertise does not guarantee wisdom, and knowledge does not always mean clarity. Experts are still human, still shaped by their time, their lens, their training. They know much, but never everything. And sometimes what they know blinds them to what they've forgotten to wonder about. Belief in expertise becomes dangerous when it replaces curiosity, when it silences dissent, when it insists that authority means infallibility. But even the tallest tower can cast a false shadow. Even the sharpest mind can miss what the heart quietly sees. Truth is not always found in credentials. Sometimes it's found in lived experience, in the hands of someone who has built with the material, in the eyes of someone who has survived what the data only describes, in the quiet of someone who has watched closely, long before they ever spoke. To doubt an expert is not to disrespect knowledge. It is to remember that wisdom listens to more than titles. It asks not only who said it, but what lives beneath what was said. It seeks resonance, not just authority. Even compasses must be recalibrated. Even stars must be remeasured as skies change. Expertise is valuable, but it must remain humble. Open. Willing to say, I don't know. Willing to be wrong. Let experts teach. Let them guide. But let truth be tested, not just inherited. Let the compass be held gently. And let direction be confirmed by the stars, the ground, the feel of the wind, not just the needle. Mistaking kindness for permanence, though even warm hands sometimes let go. Kindness feels eternal in the moment it's given. A warm word, a gentle touch, a presence that says, I'm here with you. It reaches into the ache, into the worry, and stills it. And because it feels so complete, so alive, the heart assumes it will stay. But kindness, though true, is not always forever. People come and go. Hands that once held tightly may loosen. Eyes that once saw clearly may turn away. Not out of cruelty, but out of life's shifting tides. It's easy to mistake warmth for forever. To believe that because someone cared once, they always will. Or should. But even kindness has seasons. Even closeness has limits. The flower blooms brightly, but it does not stay open through the winter. Letting go does not always mean love has vanished. Sometimes it means it has changed form, moved inward, stepped aside, or simply reached its edge. The goodbye doesn't undo the kindness. The silence doesn't cancel the softness that once was. But the heart struggles with this. It wants continuity. It wants the promise that kindness means security, that the warm hands will never pull away, that the voice that comforted will always answer. And when it doesn't, grief rises. Confusion, the sense that the kindness was a lie. But most often, it wasn't. It was real. It was enough. Just not permanent. Love, even when honest, is not always meant to last. Support, even when deep, is not always yours to keep. Some people are bridges, others brief shelters. Some kindnesses are complete in a single moment, and that is not less sacred. Do not mourn kindness because it changed. Honor it because it was. Even warm hands let go, and still they warmed. Dismissing simplicity as lesser, when some truths need only one breath to live. Simplicity is often misunderstood. It is mistaken for naivety, for lack of depth, for something unfinished or unearned. But simplicity is not the absence of thought. It is thought that has finished wrestling. It is the poem with no excess, the answer that requires no explanation, the truth that stands with nothing behind it but silence. The world prizes complexity. It rewards the tangled, the technical, the towering structures of explanation. But many of the most essential things do not need scaffolding. They arrive whole, small, undeniable. Be kind. Let go. Rest. Begin again. Truth does not always come with thunder. Sometimes it arrives like breath, like a single word that makes everything still. To dismiss simplicity is to forget that clarity is hard won, that stripping away the unnecessary is its own kind of genius, that saying less is not a failure of language, but a triumph of understanding. Complexity feels powerful because it takes up space, but simplicity holds power because it leaves room for breath, for meaning, for the quiet knowing that does not have to prove itself. Some truths are not explained. They are recognized. They live in the pause between questions, in the moment before sleep, in the eyes of someone who simply listens. Do not mistake their quiet for lack. Some truths fit in one breath, and they are enough. Trusting tradition as truth, though habits linger long after purpose has faded. Tradition arrives draped in age, in rituals repeated, in words spoken without needing to be remembered, in steps taken simply because they were once carved into the stone of the past. Tradition doesn't knock. It's already inside, woven into holidays, language, posture, silence, duty, shame. It says, "This is how it has always been," and those words feel like safety, like wisdom, like proof. There's comfort in what endures. A story that has lasted feels like a story worth keeping. The repetition becomes sacred by sheer familiarity. The hands know the motion before the mind asks why, and that smoothness is mistaken for truth. But truth is not proved by repetition, nor preserved by routine. It is not something handed down fully intact, unchanging, unquestionable. Truth is living. It breathes. It adjusts. It responds to context. But tradition, once hardened into habit, can become unmoving. It forgets how to listen, and it asks not to be questioned. That's where the danger begins, not in tradition itself, but in the unquestioned assumption that what is old must also be right. Tradition may begin in wisdom, in necessity, in beauty. But even the wisest custom can outlive its meaning. The context shifts. The world changes. And yet the ritual continues, as if time does not exist. As if repeating a gesture still offers the same truth it once did. A tool used once to heal can become a weapon when its use is no longer understood. People inherit traditions like furniture, heavy with memory, worn with use, and sometimes no longer comfortable, no longer useful, no longer fitting the shape of life as it is now. But still, they keep it. Because it belonged to someone beloved. Because it has always been there. Because removing it feels like betrayal. But clinging to tradition without examining its purpose turns reverence into rigidity. What was once an offering becomes an obligation. What was once sacred becomes a performance. Not all tradition is wrong. Not all ritual needs to be discarded. There is deep value in memory, in continuity, in shared gestures that remind us we come from somewhere, that we are part of something longer than ourselves. But tradition must be held like a living thing, not like stone. It must be asked, are you still serving what you once did? Are you still alive? Or are you just moving through the body without touching the heart? Some traditions begin with good intentions. Others are born from fear, from control, from survival strategies that no longer make sense in a world no longer shaped by the threat that created them. A practice once meant to keep someone safe may now simply keep them small. And yet, the body obeys. The mouth recites. The family repeats. The culture insists. Because it's easier not to ask questions. Because the cost of change often feels too high. But the cost of not changing is harder to see. It accumulates quietly. A slow drift into stagnation. A life lived in shapes that no longer fit. A faith reduced to symbols. A relationship performed through gestures that once meant connection, but now only mean routine. Even pain can become a tradition, passed down in silence, dressed in duty, normalized until no one remembers what it felt like to live without it. To challenge tradition is not to disrespect the past. It is to honor it more fully. To ask, what were they trying to teach me with this? Not, what did they do? But why did they do it? That is where truth waits. In the purpose, not just the pattern. If the purpose remains, keep the tradition. Let it breathe. Let it evolve, if needed. But if the purpose is gone, if the gesture is hollow, if the truth has moved on, then so should the tradition. Let it be set down with gratitude, not discarded in anger, just released. The way a candle is blown out when the sun finally rises. Tradition can serve, but it must never rule. It can guide, but it must not dictate. It can remind, but it must not replace present awareness. The soul knows when something is alive, when a ritual opens space inside instead of closing it, when a gesture still reaches the heart, when a song still stirs the breath, when a silence still holds reverence. If the tradition no longer brings that aliveness, it may be time to ask, why am I still doing this? Who taught me this? What were they trying to protect? And is that still what needs protecting now? Sometimes the most sacred act is to let go. Sometimes honoring the ancestors means changing the story they could not. Sometimes what endures is not the form, but the essence beneath it. Tradition that resists change becomes dogma. Tradition that welcomes reflection becomes wisdom. The difference lies in whether the tradition demands loyalty or invites love. Let the tradition be tested, not to break it, but to refine it. Let it rise to meet the present, not drag the present back to meet the past. Let it be something chosen, not just inherited. Because truth does not need to be old to be real, and age alone does not make something worth keeping. Accepting feedback as fact, though mirrors curve and minds warp just as easily. Feedback wears the voice of truth. It arrives with confidence, with eyes locked and words measured, often dressed in concern or wrapped in praise. Someone says, "Here's what I see in you," and because it comes from outside, it feels objective, like a mirror being held up to the soul. And the mind, hungry for self-understanding, reaches toward that mirror. It peers into the reflection and begins to believe it, especially if the voice behind it sounds sure, especially if it echoes something already feared or secretly hoped for. But mirrors, though convincing, are not always faithful. They bend, they distort, they reflect more than just what stands in front of them. They reflect light, mood, bias, timing, experience, memory. And people are no different. Every person who gives feedback carries their own mirror, their own curve, their own warping lens. To accept feedback as fact is to forget that perception is a collaboration, not a verdict. It's to forget that someone else's impression of who someone is does not always match the truth of who they are. Feedback can reveal. Yes, it can open doors, show blind spots, invite growth. But it can also mislead. It can wound. It can reflect more about the giver than the receiver. And it can be wrong. People give feedback through the lens of their own history, their own needs, their insecurities, their ideals, their triggers. One person might call someone too quiet, while another calls them steady and observant. One might say too intense, another deeply passionate. Which one is true? Maybe neither. Maybe both. Maybe truth lives somewhere in the middle, or somewhere beyond the reach of language entirely. The problem isn't with feedback itself. The problem is when it becomes law. When a passing comment hardens into identity. When a review becomes a label. When a suggestion starts to echo louder than intuition. The heart is tender. It absorbs quickly. A single phrase, "You talk too much," "You're not assertive enough," "You don't seem passionate," can settle in and begin to shape how someone moves, speaks, shows up in the world. And yet, that phrase might have come from someone who never stayed long enough to truly see. Sometimes people give feedback out of love, sometimes out of ego, sometimes from a place of deep misunderstanding. And yet all of it arrives the same way, like a mirror held up and trusted without question. But not every mirror is straight. Not every eye sees clearly. Not every word is meant to help. And even those that are meant to help can still hurt if they don't land with care. The danger deepens when the feedback confirms what someone already fears. Then it doesn't matter if it's accurate. It feels true. The old insecurity gets a new voice. The old doubt finds fresh reinforcement. And slowly, a person begins to believe that what was said once must be true always. But truth does not arrive through a single doorway. It comes in echoes, in quiet patterns, in questions that repeat softly over time. It comes not only from others, but from within, from reflection, from relationship, from consistency. To trust only external feedback is to outsource the understanding of the self, to hand the story of one's life to someone else's pen. And no matter how kind or wise that person may be, they are not the author. That said, ignoring feedback entirely is not the answer either. That leads to isolation, to ego, to blind spots that remain blind, to walls that keep out not only harm, but also growth. The middle path is reflection, discernment, taking in what's offered with curiosity, not immediate acceptance. Asking, does this resonate? Does this repeat? Is this true only in their eyes, or do I see it too? And, even if it is true, what do I want to do with it? Not all feedback is a call to change. Sometimes it's just information, a glimpse into how someone else experiences another person. That glimpse can be useful, but it is not a command. It is not a verdict. Feedback should be held lightly at first, like fire in the hand, not to be ignored, but to be approached with care. What burns might be true, or it might just be hot with someone else's projection. The best mirrors are not the ones that show every flaw, but the ones that reflect with clarity, context, and compassion. And even then, they are only one perspective. No single mirror holds the whole view. Some of the most harmful feedback is delivered with the greatest confidence. And some of the most helpful is spoken gently, uncertainly, with room for disagreement. Feedback that honors the mystery of a person is often more trustworthy than feedback that claims to define them completely. Let feedback be received, but let the self be the final witness. Let it stir thought, not shape identity. Let it live in dialogue, not dogma. And when it feels wrong, trust that instinct. Not all mirrors are meant to be stared into. Some are meant to be walked past, because the self is not a reflection. It is a presence, and that presence deserves more than just the echo of someone else's voice. Fearing mystery, though unnamed stars still shine in perfect clarity. Mystery unsettles the mind. It exists without explanation, without label, without edges to grasp. It refuses to be pinned down. It lives in the unspoken, in the unseen, in the places just beyond the reach of language. And for many, that is enough to spark fear. The modern world has grown uncomfortable with mystery. It trades the unknown for definitions. It seeks security in the act of naming, dissecting, categorizing, explaining. Everything must be accounted for. Every question must have a conclusion. Every silence must be filled. But mystery is not absence. It is presence that resists capture. Mystery is the pulse that continues even when the cause cannot be traced. It is the feeling that comes before understanding, the ache before articulation, the beauty that does not ask to be useful. It does not need to be solved to be real. Still, the mind fears what it cannot master. It fears what it cannot control. It fears floating without anchor, even if the sea beneath is made of stars. And so, the mind begins to shrink the world. It reduces wonder to knowledge. It replaces curiosity with certainty. It teaches that what cannot be explained must be dangerous or useless. It forgets that not all clarity comes from understanding. Some clarity comes from simply allowing what is to be. Mystery is not the enemy of truth. It is the birthplace of it. Consider the stars, those distant fires that have burned long before names were given. Their beauty needed no catalog to shine. Their existence needed no theory to matter. The name was added later. The stories drawn between them were acts of human poetry, not necessity. And even now, with all we know about orbits and spectrums and fusion, their most essential wonder remains untouched. We do not gaze at them for their physics. We gaze because they pull something deeper, something wordless. Mystery holds that same power in every part of life. In the person we cannot fully understand, but are drawn to. In the dream that repeats but resists interpretation. In the grief that does not follow rules. In the sudden knowing that arrives without logic. In the quiet call to go a certain way without knowing why. But many reject these things. They are taught to fear the unproven, the intangible, the intuitive. Taught to seek only what can be measured. To ask only what can be answered. To trust only what can be written down. Yet the soul does not move that way. The soul is shaped by mystery. It longs for the kind of knowing that is felt, not solved. The kind that deepens with time instead of closing in with conclusion. When mystery is feared, the world becomes flat. It loses color. The questions that once opened the heart are shut. The symbols are stripped of meaning. The sky is measured, but never stared into. Wonder is traded for precision, but at what cost? The cost is subtle. It arrives in restlessness, in the ache of a life too explained, too scheduled, too known. In the sense that something essential has been left behind, something that once stirred in the dark, now silenced under fluorescent light. Mystery is not chaos. It is not confusion. It is not the absence of truth. It is a deeper kind of truth, one that refuses to be reduced. It is the truth that holds space instead of offering conclusions. To fear mystery is to fear oneself, because no one is fully knowable, not even to themselves. There are thoughts that emerge without origin, feelings that rise like tides, unmapped, desires that surprise, shadows that remain even in the brightest room. These are not flaws. They are the texture of being human. They are the stars within, unnamed, but real. Mystery asks for trust, not in a system, not in a doctrine, but in presence, in patience, in allowing the not knowing to be a space, not a threat. It is in mystery that healing begins, that creativity lives, that intimacy deepens. It is in the mystery of sitting with someone without needing to fix them, of beginning a story with no ending in mind, of loving someone not because they are understood, but because they are felt. Mystery softens the grip of control. It teaches that some things unfold, not because we figured them out, but because we stayed long enough to witness them. The deepest spiritual traditions do not eliminate mystery. They bow to it. They carve out rituals and silences and stories around it, not to explain it, but to hold it. Even science, when honest, ends in mystery. The edges of physics collapse into paradox. The beginning of time eludes final definition. Consciousness continues to defy complete mapping. The closer we look, the more the unknown expands. To live well is not to escape mystery. It is to befriend it. To look into the night sky without needing to name every star. To let a question live in the body for years. To accept that the heart's deepest truths may never be spoken, but they are no less real. To listen without fixing. To feel without labeling. To experience without dissecting. Let mystery return. Let it be honored. Let it widen the days and soften the nights. Let it remind the heart that there is more to life than explanation. Because the soul does not ask to be solved. It asks to be seen, and the unnamed stars still shine, clear as ever. Believing awareness grants control, forgetting how softly sleep takes the reins. Awareness is praised as power. In books, in therapy, in the quiet wisdom circles of those who seek to live with intention, awareness is named as the beginning of change. And often, it is. To notice is to interrupt the unconscious, to bring the hidden into view, to shine light into the places where old patterns once ruled unchallenged. But the mind, eager for certainty, makes a subtle leap. If awareness can bring change, then awareness must be control. And so it begins to believe that simply knowing should be enough, that seeing clearly should fix the problem, that naming the emotion should neutralize its force, that recognizing the pattern should immediately undo it. But awareness does not guarantee mastery. It does not mean the reins are in hand. In fact, sometimes awareness sharpens the ache. To witness without the ability to steer is its own quiet kind of torment. There's a moment in the middle of the night when sleep begins to take over. The body relaxes, the thoughts stretch and soften. Something loosens. Awareness fades. And for most, that moment is not a failure. It is peace. And yet, that same surrender, in waking life, is seen as weakness, as if letting go means giving up, as if not being fully in control at all times is something to correct. But sleep teaches otherwise. It teaches that letting go is not always losing control. It is sometimes the only path to deeper rhythms, to healing, to rest, to realignment. And it does not ask for conscious permission. It comes quietly when it's needed, not always when it's wanted. Awareness can be like that, present one moment, distant the next, slipping in and out. And that's not failure, it's human. People imagine that once they become aware of their wounds, their habits, their triggers, those things should lose their power. But the nervous system doesn't always respond to insight. The body doesn't always follow the timeline of thought. Old reactions still rise. Familiar pain still pulses. The awareness is there, but it doesn't always win. That doesn't mean it's useless. It means it's not a weapon. Awareness is a companion, not a conqueror. It stands beside the part that still panics, still lashes out, still shuts down. It whispers, "I see you." It reminds the self, there is more here than this reflex, but it doesn't erase the reflex, and it doesn't rush the healing. Control is seductive because it promises certainty. It promises that with enough insight, everything can be managed, that no more mistakes will be made, that no more pain will be felt unexpectedly, that peace will be permanent. But peace, like sleep, does not arrive because we demand it. It arrives when we stop demanding, when we exhale, when we trust. When we let go of the belief that being awake to life means we must also master every moment of it. Sometimes, awareness means knowing exactly what's happening and still not being able to stop it. And that's not weakness. It's the tension of growing, of stretching into the in-between, of being awake and unfinished. The child doesn't walk the first time they realize what walking is. The artist doesn't master their craft the first time they understand its form. And the human heart doesn't heal the first time it names what broke it. To expect awareness to grant control is to put too much pressure on the moment of realization. It's to ask a mirror not only to reflect, but to fix. And mirrors don't fix, they just show. Control may come later, or it may never come fully. But understanding? Understanding grows, even in the moments when control slips through the fingers. The mind resists this. It wants to earn safety, to prove its worth by solving its patterns, to believe that consciousness is a kind of currency that buys immunity from suffering. But suffering is not always banished by awareness. Sometimes it is deepened, seen in greater detail, felt with more nuance, named, yes, but not avoided. And yet, something happens in that naming, slowly, subtly. Even if the pattern repeats, it is not quite the same. Even if the wound still stings, it begins to be held differently, with less shame, with more tenderness, with a strange kind of respect. Because the soul is not a machine to be controlled. It is a mystery to be witnessed. It is not made obedient by surveillance. It is softened by presence, by kindness, by the quiet patience of returning again and again, even when nothing seems to be changing. Awareness is the beginning of that patience, not because it fixes everything, but because it changes the relationship to what cannot yet be fixed. To know and still fall short, that is not failure, that is practice. To see clearly and still ache, that is not brokenness, that is depth. To be awake and still unsure, that is not defeat, that is devotion. Sleep comes not because it is controlled, but because it is allowed. It comes not by force, but by letting go. And the same is true of growth. The reins do not always need to be in hand. Sometimes the wisest thing is to rest them gently on the saddle. To trust that something deeper is steering, something quieter than thought, something older than logic. Awareness is light, but even light casts shadows. And within those shadows, life continues. Honest, messy, sacred. Let awareness be what it is, a light, not a leash. Because control may come and go, but clarity does not depend on it. And even in the softest surrender, truth remains. Measuring depth by pain, as if only suffering can make a soul profound. Pain is loud. It carves deep grooves in memory. It marks time. It reshapes how the world is seen, how love is received, how trust is offered. And because it leaves such lasting fingerprints, the world often begins to believe that pain is what makes a person deep. The quiet assumption forms. Those who have suffered most must understand most. That wisdom lives in the broken places. That empathy is earned only through aching. And so pain becomes a kind of credential, proof of growth, of depth, of spiritual maturity. But depth is not a reward for suffering. It is not pain that makes someone deep. It is what they do with it. And even then, pain is not the only path. Joy can deepen a soul. So can wonder. So can silence and softness and steady love. There are people who have not been shattered, yet they carry wisdom like water. Not because they were broken, but because they listened, because they stayed awake, because they paid attention to life even when it wasn't screaming. Depth comes not from the intensity of what happens, but from the willingness to be present with whatever does. The idea that only pain makes someone deep is dangerous. It glamorizes wounds. It makes healing feel like a betrayal of insight. It keeps people tangled in trauma because they fear that without it, they will lose their understanding of the world. But pain is not the only teacher. It's just the loudest. There are those who walk gently through the world, who do not raise their voice, who do not carry scars across their chest, and yet they know, they see. Not because they've bled, but because they've opened. Depth is the result of receptivity, of integration, of allowing the full range of life, not just the hard parts, to shape the self. And there are those who have suffered greatly, but never gone deep. Pain alone does not transform. It can harden just as easily as it humbles. It can shut down just as easily as it awakens. Pain is a door, but not everyone chooses to walk through. So let pain be honored, yes. Let it be seen as a force that can teach, but not the only one, and not always the most trustworthy. Because the soul does not grow only through thunder. It grows in stillness, in awe, in beauty, in love that doesn't have to be earned. Measuring depth by pain narrows the truth of what it means to be alive. Let depth be measured by presence, by how gently someone holds the world, by how deeply they listen. Not just by what they've survived. Assuming stillness is stagnation, though the seed must stay buried before it can rise. In a world that celebrates momentum, stillness is misunderstood. It is seen as a pause in progress, as delay, as hesitation, as something to be fixed. People rush to explain their quiet seasons, to justify their rest, to turn their waiting into productivity, because to be still is often mistaken for being stuck. But stillness is not stagnation. It is gestation. The seed beneath the soil does not move, but it transforms. It breaks open. It deepens. It prepares. The darkness around it is not a grave. It is a womb. There are seasons in life where nothing appears to be happening. The plans are paused. The inspiration has dried. The clarity has not yet arrived. And the instinct is to panic, to dig up the seed, to push forward anyway, to force movement. But the most essential changes happen invisibly. Healing happens in sleep. Growth begins before it is noticed. Shifts in identity form long before they are named. The soul, like the earth, has cycles, and not all of them bloom above ground. Stillness is sacred because it teaches surrender. It asks for patience when there is no reward in sight. It teaches trust, not in the outcome, but in the process itself. The fear of stillness often comes from the mind's obsession with certainty. If nothing is moving, it says, then something must be wrong. But stillness is not absence. It is presence in a quieter form. Think of the ocean in its calmest hour. It holds weight. It reflects truth. It does not thrash to prove it is alive. There is a stillness in grief, in waiting, in reflection, in creativity that has not yet found its shape. And that stillness is not empty. It is full of listening, of preparation, of quiet conversation between what was and what wants to be. To rush that process is to abandon the wisdom of timing. To label the stillness as failure is to miss what it's making room for. The tree does not apologize for winter. The moon does not speed through its phases. They trust the rhythm. They rest when it's time to rest. They rise when it's time to rise. And so should we. Let stillness be honored. Let it be seen not as weakness, but as strength unspoken. Let the seed remain buried. Let it soften. Let it split. Let it stretch toward the unseen light. Because stillness is not stagnation. It is becoming.